Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Ashley Dale. On a summer night in 2022, an innocent woman fell victim in Liverpool's Old Swan district, just a few miles from the city centre. At 12:41 a.m. on August 21, 2022, police received a call from a neighbor reporting a violent situation taking place next door. When the police arrived, the house was eerily quiet, with the front door clearly broken open, suggesting that a violent incident had occurred. The back door leading to the garden was left ajar. As the police cautiously entered the garden, they discovered the body of a woman. Just a few meters away, her mobile phone appeared to have slipped from her hand in her final moments. They quickly understood the gravity of the situation when they found a number of spent bullet casings scattered around the house. While one officer was investigating the crime scene, other officers arrived, waking several neighbors with the noise. Neighbors reported hearing gunshots coming from the house, while others said they heard screeching tires and car alarms going off hours before the incident. The tragic event left everyone in the area shocked. Neighbors helped the police identify the victim as 28-year-old Ashley Dale. Ashley grew up in a close-knit family and was the oldest of 3 siblings. In 2015, her younger brother was mistakenly murdered by a gang at the age of 16. Ashley was deeply affected by the death of her younger brother, which changed her outlook on life. However, she persevered, using her grief as motivation to study and eventually earn a degree in environmental conservation. This achievement led to a fulfilling career as an environmental conservationist, where she thrived and earned the respect of her colleagues. They admired not only her dedication to her work but also her genuine compassion for those around her. In her role, Ashley focused on various projects to improve living conditions and public health in the city, establishing herself as a hardworking, intelligent, and goal-oriented person. In her personal life, Ashley Dale cherished time with her family, friends, and dog. Her loved ones described her as intelligent, kind, and caring. Despite her difficult past and the pain of losing a loved one, she moved forward with determination and succeeded in her path. However, things became more complicated when she started dating Lee Harrison, a man with deep ties to the criminal world. His connections to gangs caused serious concerns for Ashley's family, who feared for her safety. Although Ashley believed that Lee was gradually changing, she still trusted him. Lee Harrison, a 28-year-old man from Liverpool, was deeply involved with many gangs and banned substance trafficking. He was particularly close to Neil Berry, a local banned substance dealer. However, their friendship began to decline in 2018 due to issues related to banned substance and trust. That year, Neil was robbed of $50,000 worth of banned substance hidden in his home in an incident orchestrated by a rival gang. Neil suspected that Lee Harrison may have informed his rivals about the incident. Although Lee denied any wrongdoing, their relationship soured, turning them into enemies. In June 2022, Lee Harrison and Ashley Dale bumped into each other at the Glastonbury Festival, rekindling old feelings. However, they also encountered a member of Neil's gang, leading to a violent brawl due to their rivalry. Neil, who was at the festival, threatened to stab Lee the next time they encountered each other. The following day, police arrested Neil and his friends for his threatening behavior. Luckily for Neil, a friend of his took the blame when a knife was found next to Neil's passport, claiming it was his. The friend, James Witham, was later arrested on suspicion of carrying a weapon, but despite the police involvement, tensions remained high following the Glastonbury incident. Ashley's life changed dramatically after that. The encounter with the gang left her feeling paranoid and fearful. Over the following weeks, her concerns about physical threats from Neil Berry grew. Not only had he threatened them during the festival, but he had also warned that he would show up at their home address. This terrifying prospect had a profound effect on Ashley, and she confided in her best friend. She expressed her anxiety in a text message, saying she can't stop thinking that something is wrong. As her anxiety grew, Ashley reached out to several friends for support. In another message, she described how distressing the situation had become and how it was affecting her mental health. Despite her efforts to calm herself, Ashley couldn't shake the feeling that something worse was ahead. Unfortunately, her intuition was correct. On the evening of August 20th, 2022, Ashley posted a photo of herself relaxing on the couch, completely unaware of what would happen after dark. Then, her car alarm suddenly went off. It was her car, but she ignored it. Frustrated, she continued to enjoy the evening and texted a friend about the siren going off again, assuming it was because of the rain. The message seemed normal, but there was a paranoid undertone. That night, she sent another message saying, "She don't know, but it looks like someone is outside." Over time, Ashley's anxiety increased, and her car alarm went off again, reinforcing her belief that someone was outside and that something was seriously wrong. On the morning of August 21st, the doorbell rang, and Ashley sensed that it was bad news. The sound echoed through the quiet house, and suddenly, the door swung open, revealing an armed man standing in the doorway. He acted quickly, opening fire without giving her a chance to react. In a panic, Ashley grabbed her phone and ran out the back door. The attacker then moved throughout the house, shooting into several rooms in an attempt to find her, hoping she was hiding in the backyard. Ashley faced her final moments with extreme fear. She could not escape the violence or her fatal injuries, and the final text messages she sent just before the attack served as a haunting reminder of her awareness of the danger. Tragically, Ashley Dale was murdered, and many suspect that Lee Harrison's connection to gang activity contributed to her death. Police discovered that all of Ashley's tires had been slashed, likely due to the attacker's actions, which had set off her car alarm. Police believe this was a deliberate attempt to lure Ashley and Lee Harrison away from their home. When her family heard her last text message, they were devastated to realize that she had sensed something was seriously wrong. Fortunately, Ashley's text message contained vital information that would help solve her murder. Police now need to piece together the evidence. However, the investigation remains tense and complicated, especially because of her boyfriend, Lee Harrison. He happened to be absent during the shooting and was very unwilling to cooperate with the police, even refusing to testify. When he was brought in for questioning, he chose to remain silent, which hampered the investigation. He changed his mobile phone number and shunned Ashley's entire family, leaving them devastated. Lee's lack of empathy only increased concerns about his possible involvement in her death. Police were surprised to discover that shortly after Ashley's death, he had gone on holiday and left the country. This raised suspicions among the police, who wondered if he had done this to avoid prosecution. While he was on holiday, they focused on the events that took place on the night of August 20th, 2022. Surveillance camera footage showed them entering a store. After making a purchase, they left and got into a gray Hyundai i3. This car later became key evidence, as another surveillance camera recorded it near Ashley's home earlier that day. Surveillance camera footage captured a car approaching Ashley's home, showing the driver surveying the area before the attack that evening. James Witham and Joseph Piers approached Ashley's Volkswagen parked outside the family home and punctured the tires in order to set off the alarm. They attempted to lure Lee or Ashley out, but neither responded. Frustrated, they decided to retreat and come up with a new plan, which went badly wrong. An hour later, both men returned to Ashley's home, but this time one of them was armed, indicating their violent intentions. They broke into the house by forcing down the front door and saw Ashley running toward the back door. When she reached the garden door, James fired 8 shots from his pistol, hitting her in the back. After watching her fall, he went upstairs and fired 5 more shots into an empty bedroom, possibly as a threat. After a quick survey of the house and finding no one else inside, James quickly ran downstairs. Both James and Joseph then fled the scene. Fortunately, a neighbor's surveillance camera recorded the events that followed the attack. James and Joseph checked into a hotel in St. Helens to avoid detection. However, the police were able to track their movements and quickly located their car, leading to their arrest. Meanwhile, Neil Barry, who played a key role in organizing the attack, was spotted at a local golf club. Intelligence reports also indicated that he had been seen at a golf resort. The police worked together effectively to arrest him, and soon a fourth accomplice, Sean Zeiss, was arrested in connection with Ashley's murder. After the arrest and indictment of James Witham, Neil Barry, Sean Zeiss, and Joseph Pierce, the police gathered evidence, leading to the start of the trial. James Witham, who shot Ashley, initially claimed he did not intend to kill her. He argued that he intended to shoot her as a warning but accidentally hit her, asserting that her death was accidental. However, this defense was difficult to believe in court due to the overwhelming evidence, including previous threats, text messages, extensive surveillance camera footage, and numerous witness statements. When Ashley discovered that two armed men had broken into her home, she screamed in fear and tried to escape through the back door. James, who was armed, had time to aim. He fired 2 shots at Ashley, hitting her in the back as she tried to run away. It was clear that he had shot her intentionally. In November 2023, at Liverpool Crown Court, the judge sentenced James Witham, 41, Neil Barry, 26, Sean Zeiss, 28, and Joseph Pierce, 29, for murder, conspiracy to murder, and unlawful possession of a firearm. The 4 were sentenced to a total of 173 years in prison. James was sentenced to life with the possibility of parole after 43 years, Neil to life with the possibility of parole after 47 years, Joseph to life with the possibility of parole after 41 years, and Sean to life with the possibility of parole after 42 years. The sentencing of Ashley Dales for killers has left her family with mixed emotions. Although they feel that justice has been served, it can never replace the profound loss they have experienced. Ashley Dale's tragic death has left her family in a state of grief. Ashley's mother described the loss as life-changing. Adding to their grief, Ashley's younger brother was killed by the same gang. Her father lamented, "Ashley, the eldest of my 3 children, and my son are now both gone." Despite the loss, the family has become advocates against gang violence, working to unite the community and provide support through memorials for Ashley. Meanwhile, Ashley's boyfriend, Lee Harrison, has faced no consequences and remains at large. Even after his girlfriend was murdered, he continued to sell banned substance for profit. Gun violence in the UK is low, with one of the lowest gun-related homicide rates in the world. Despite a population increase since 2011, the average number of gun homicides in the UK remains at 29 per year. The level of gang violence in the UK has only increased in recent years, possibly due to poverty and lack of education. The situation in the gang world is not improving. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Amy Mullis. Love triangles are among the most common causes of domestic crimes. This is a story about the Mullis family's farm in Ulville, Iowa, USA, a quiet and peaceful place with a close-knit community. On November 10, 2018, the younger Mullis children stayed home while their parents worked with their oldest son, Tristan, in one of the farm's pig barns. The family divided responsibilities among themselves to ensure everyone handled tasks they were best suited for. On that day, Tristan was cleaning the barn while his father, Todd Mullis, checked the electrical equipment. Tristan's mother, Amy, joined them a little later. When she entered the barn, She tripped over a bucket and nearly fell. Just a day before this incident, Amy had been experiencing health issues, including dizziness and pain. She had visited the doctor multiple times for similar problems. It seemed she hadn't fully recovered, yet she still decided to work. Noticing his wife's exhaustion, her husband suggested that she go home and rest. Todd mentioned that she could assist him later once he finished the main tasks with Tristan. Amy agreed but wanted to complete a small chore first. She intended to visit the nearby shed to retrieve a carrier for their animals, as they needed to take their cat to the veterinary clinic the following day. After Amy left, the father and son continued their work together. Eventually, Todd glanced out the window and noticed that the door of the distant shed was still open, even though Amy had been gone for quite some time. She should have returned by now with the carrier and closed the barn. Growing concerned that something might have happened, he worried that his wife might have fallen again due to her dizziness. He then asked Tristan to go outside and check what was happening. Perhaps his mother needed help. When Tristan arrived at the shed, he was shocked to see his mother with the tines of a corn rake protruding from her body. He rushed inside and realized it was critical. He immediately called for his father. Todd quickly ran to the source of the scream and recognized that he needed to act fast. He instructed his son to fetch the family pickup truck. Tristan was already skilled at driving and could navigate the property swiftly. While Tristan went for the truck, Todd attempted to help Amy and carry her out of the shed. The rake made it difficult for him to maneuver through the narrow space, forcing him to pull it out of her body. By the time Tristan arrived with the pickup truck, Todd had loaded Amy into the vehicle and quickly took the driver's seat. Tristan held his dying mother in his arms as his father called 911. The dispatcher received a call from a very agitated man who was shouting for help. Todd reported that an accident had occurred on the farm and that his wife was seriously injured. He explained to the operator that they had found her lying face down in the shed with a corn rake sticking out of her back. The corn rake had 4 straight, sharp tines designed to easily penetrate hay or piles of leaves, and unfortunately, they had pierced her flesh. While he was on the phone with the operator, Amy stopped breathing. The dispatcher instructed him to pull over and provide first aid. Following the operator's guidance, the father and son stopped their vehicle, laid Amy on the ground, alternated performing artificial respiration and chest compressions. Unfortunately, the resuscitation efforts did not have the desired effect. Todd took Amy to the emergency department, but there the doctors could only confirm the death of her. The police then called the father and son to the station to take their statements while forensic experts examined the scene. Tristan supported his father's account, which helped establish a solid alibi for Todd. Tristan firmly asserted that he had not taken his eyes off his father until he saw the rake protruding from his mother's back. He believes that a tragic accident has occurred. During the initial investigation, most of Tristan's account was corroborated. When Tristan and his father discovered Amy, she was still alive but unconscious. The police also interviewed Todd, who stated that he did not know how his wife was injured, as he was not present when it occurred. Todd speculated that she might have fallen onto a corn rake, possibly due to feeling dizzy. Although this explanation seems somewhat far-fetched, law enforcement chose to wait for the medical examiner's findings before drawing conclusions. The report arrived quickly, raising further questions. Notably, there were 6 puncture wounds from the corn rake, which was puzzling since the tool only had 4 prongs, meaning it should have left only 4 marks. The medical examiner noted that Amy had other injuries, including a bruise on her upper lip and several fresh bruises on her face. There were also similar bruises on her arms and legs, some of which appeared to be defensive wounds, suggesting that she had been in a struggle with at least one other person. There was no doubt that it was not an accident. It was clear that Amy had been attacked. Detectives began investigating the murder, and after new developments emerged, forensic experts returned to the barn to closely examine the scene and validate the coroner's suspicions. During the initial examination right after the incident, it was already dark, so the detectives needed to conduct a thorough inspection this time. Forensic scientists found several bloodstains in the shed, where Tristan had discovered his injured mother. There were small splatters on the chemical bags along the walls, on the floor, and on all nearby surfaces. The scene indicated a violent attack, as the blood had spread widely. This suggested that Amy could not have fallen onto the acorn rake by herself, as her husband had claimed. She had been beaten with a farming tool, receiving 2 or 3 blows. The area where the crime occurred had been overall very peaceful. In the last 10 years, this was only the 4th murder. For this reason, law enforcement officials decided to seek assistance from state authorities, who had much more experience in solving such cases. Investigators spoke with the neighbors of the Mallas family, who revealed that their marriage had long been troubled. Their spouses were experiencing difficulties, frequently argued, even though the husband was known to be calm and non-confrontational. This raised suspicions among the police, leading them to believe that Todd not be telling the truth. He had a motive, making him the primary suspect in the case. Consequently, the police began to examine him more closely. The tragic loss of Amy, a kind and vibrant person, shocked the local community. Many were surprised that a mother of 3 could find herself in such a deadly situation. Detectives began investigating the couple's personal life to find a possible motive for the murder. 5 years earlier, Amy had cheated on Todd, which shattered his trust in her. This betrayal led to a decline in their once ideal relationship. However, they worked through their issues, decided to try to save their marriage for the sake of their children. They attended counseling with a family psychologist. Amy left her nursing job at the hospital to spend more time with her family, help on the farm, where she took care of the plants and animals and managed the family's finances. She told her friends that she quit her job at Todd's, urging to avoid new temptations. Meanwhile, Todd also made an effort to spend more time with Amy and their children. Despite these efforts, the psychologist observed that Todd could never fully regain his trust in Amy. Amy spent all her time on the farm, where Todd was usually present both day and night. As a result, Todd's behavior became much more controlling than it had been before. Later, Amy expressed her frustration, saying that her husband was practically monitoring her. They seemed to have reached an agreement about how they spent their time together, which Todd believed was a way to rebuild trust in their relationship. However, this situation became a major issue for Amy. She jokingly referred to herself as her husband's prisoner. She shared with her close friends. Todd even restricted Amy's friendships, deciding who she could communicate with and what interests she could pursue. One of the friends he allowed, Patricia Christopherson, noted that since 2018, Amy had stopped feeling joy in her marriage. Patricia claimed that even a year earlier, Amy had been unhappy, and her affair was a way to escape Todd's excessive control. Others in their circle suspected that Todd was involved in the murder. Several witnesses supported claims that Todd had total control over his wife and exhibited suspicious behavior. However, Todd presented a different narrative. He claimed that he spent nearly all his time with his wife and was very happy, asserting that there were no issues in their relationship. He stated that they had fully restored their previous harmonious and communication that they once had. However, during the investigation, it became clear that this was not entirely accurate. In July 2018, just a few months before the tragedy, Todd noticed changes in Amy's behavior, which led him to question her fidelity. He reviewed phone records and found that Amy had been communicating with another man, Jerry Frasher. Todd discovered around 120 messages exchanged between them and confronted Jerry directly. Jerry, who worked as an assistant on their farm and handled administrative tasks, denied having an affair, insisting that their correspondence was purely work-related. Todd was unable to access their message exchanges, which made him skeptical of Jerry's claims. He even contacted Jerry's wife, who reassured him that she trusted her husband completely and had no concerns about infidelity. This conversation seemed to ease Todd's worries, and he stopped suspecting his wife of any new infidelities. However, investigations later revealed that Amy and Jerry were romantically involved. Amy was having an affair again, which investigators believed could be a motive for murder. The police theorized that Todd discovered the affair, overwhelmed by shock, killed his wife. However, this theory was complicated by Todd's alibi. he had been with Tristan until Tristan went to check on his mother. Tristan claimed there were no arguments between his parents that day, and he had kept an eye on his father. Despite this, the police wanted to explore another possibility. Jerry Frasher might also have had a motive for murder. Jerry did not want to leave his family. Could he have killed Amy to keep his family intact? The detectives needed to investigate this angle as well. Amy often expressed frustration about Todd working too much, leaving her to handle various farm tasks that she disliked. She wanted to go out and enjoy life, spending more time in town. After trying to salvage her relationship, it became clear to her that she and Todd had significant differences. Jerry often visited the farm for work, where he interacted with Todd and Amy. Occasionally, he spoke with Amy privately, and their conversations gradually turned into flirting, then an intimate affair. This relationship began in late May 2018. The couple met about once a week for intimate, typically in cars on the farm's dirt roads or during brief stays in motel rooms. For Amy, it became a source of inspiration, leading her to express a desire to leave her husband and marry Jerry. This would require Jerry to get a divorce, but his wife was unaware of the affair. Jerry was content in his marriage and had no intention of divorcing. He did not take his relationship with Amy seriously and even wanted to end it, as he felt it had gone too far. Law enforcement officials recovered most of the letters exchanged between Jerry and Amy, revealing that their relationship lasted until the summer of 2018. At that point, Jerry suggested they slow things down because he was uncertain about their future together. Meanwhile, there were indications that Amy was determined to confess her feelings. This created a sense of threat for Jerry, providing him with a strong motive for murder. Jerry spent about an hour and a half confessing to the affair but maintained that he could not have killed Amy. He stated that at the time of the attack, he was at his home in Anamosa, which is a 45-minute drive from the crime scene. Investigators checked the mobile phone data of Jerry, which showed activity at the same times every hour. Jerry's cell phone active at around 10:45, 11:45, 12:45, all in Anamosa. However, this did not definitively confirm his alibi, as a calculated murderer would likely avoid taking their phone to the crime scene. The hourly activity raised suspicions, leaving him not entirely free from scrutiny. Investigators were still focused on the widower, Todd. He had a significant financial motive as well. If a divorce occurred, he would have to pay more than half of his income to support their 3 children. Friends mentioned that Amy, despite wanting a divorce, was afraid to leave Todd because she feared his reaction. Some described him as rude and aggressive, suggesting he could be capable of murder, although he had never been seen treating his wife poorly. The investigators then turned their attention to Todd's behavior on the day of Amy's death. During questioning, his reactions raised suspicions. Typically, innocent people defend themselves aggressively, but Todd remained calm when asked about the murder allegations. This calmness could indicate subconscious guilt. Overall, he was known to be a calm person with a quiet temperament. The farm had several cameras, one of which had a view of almost the entire area around the barn, where the murder occurred. Unfortunately, no recordings from that day were saved. It appears someone deleted them to hide their involvement. Given the circumstances, the prime suspect was the victim's husband. In February 2019, Todd Mollis was arrested and charged with murdering his wife. Nearly a year after Amy's death, both her family and the relatives of Todd gathered at the courthouse. Todd, a hard-working farmer known for being a devoted father, now faced charges for the brutal murder of his wife. The defense attorney agreed with the prosecution that the crime was premeditated but argued that Todd could not have attacked his wife with the corn rake, as Tristan had been in sight of him the whole time. They claimed there was no physical evidence linking Todd to the crime, no fingerprints, no DNA on the corn rake, and no traces of the attacker were found. The prosecution countered that the murder was driven by a personal motive, emphasizing that it wasn't a distant shooting but rather a close-range attack using an unusual weapon from the farm's tools. If a stranger had committed the crime, they likely wouldn't have used a tool found on the farm. Todd was familiar with that corn rake, skilled in its use, and knew exactly where it was kept. He acted decisively, leaving Amy no chance to escape. He attacked her multiple times. During the trial, many witnesses who knew both Amy and Todd testified. One of them was a doctor from the emergency room where the victim had worked as a nurse for many years. Amy was brought to the same hospital where she had previously saved lives. Unfortunately, shortly after her arrival, she was declared dead by the medical examiner and law enforcement. The doctors were puzzled by how a single blow from a four-pronged corn rake could cause 6 deep wounds on Amy's body. The eldest son, Tristan, served as the main witness for the defense. Both sides carefully examined his statements during the hearings. The prosecution faced a challenge with the alibi that Tristan maintained. However, just days before the trial began, law enforcement re-interviewed Tristan. He admitted that he had lost sight of his father several times while fetching water for the shed, but insisted that his father was only gone for a few minutes each time. The defendant's lawyer argued that this brief absence was not enough time to commit the crime and hide the evidence. Yet, during the trial, Tristan changed his testimony again, stating that he could not accurately determine how long his father had been missing. This gave the prosecution a chance to highlight Todd's lack of an alibi. However, Tristan insisted that his father could not have killed his mother and claimed he did not see any blood on him, which allowed the defense attorney to build their argument. The defense maintained that Todd did not have enough time to get water, go to the shed, deal with his wife, and return. Furthermore, the blood spatter in the room where the attack took place was too extensive for the attacker to avoid getting covered in blood. The lawyer argued that the prosecution had no direct evidence against Todd, which was true. The case also leaned on the search histories of both the victim and the accused. Amy had searched online about how infidelity could affect property division in a divorce, while Todd's phone had concerning searches related to the consequences of murder. During the trial, Todd spent 3 hours answering the prosecutor's questions, maintaining his innocence and claiming he was unaware of Amy's new relationship. He explained to the jury that the security cameras were not functioning during the attack because, in his view, the cats had accidentally disconnected the wires while looking for a warm spot. Investigators was revealed that the cameras had been out of order for 2 weeks before Amy's death, and Todd only repaired the system after the police discovered the disconnected wires. By the end of the interrogations, the jury began deliberating the verdict. Because there was no direct evidence and many disagreements about the case, the jurors split into 2 groups with opposing opinions. After about 7 hours of discussion, Todd Mollis was found guilty of first-degree murder. The court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Disappointed, Todd shook his head as he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He immediately disagreed with the verdict once it was announced. He hired a new legal team and filed a motion for a retrial. Todd argued that no one was in the shed when his wife accidentally fell on a corn rake after losing consciousness. She had been feeling dizzy and even visited the hospital the day before her death. There was no substantial evidence against Todd, just speculation and rumors, but his appeal was denied. Now, he is focused on appealing the verdict from prison and believes that justice will eventually be served. He feels an accidental incident took the life of a mother of 3, and an unjust legal system took their father from them. Todd and Amy Mollis's 3 children are now cared for by Amy's family. Some nights, Sandra Melgar lies awake in her small prison cell, unable to stop herself from reflecting on how drastically her life has changed. Never, in her wildest imagination, did she think she would end up a widow? And later, the prime suspect in her husband's murder. It seemed unimaginable that, a year and a half after his death, a grand jury would quietly indict her, and that nearly 5 years later, a jury would convict her based solely on circumstantial evidence. There was no clear motive, no eyewitnesses, no physical evidence directly linking her to the crime. Now, at 59 years old, every day since her husband's death has been nothing short of a nightmare. Sandra has been incarcerated at the William P. Hobby Unit, a women's prison set in the quiet Texas countryside. She continues to stay in touch with friends and family, many of whom still firmly believe she is innocent. Sandra spends a couple of hours most weekends with rotating groups of family and supporters. She speaks regularly with her daughter and only child, Elizabeth Liz Malgar Rose. Though the loud prison environment and Sandra's gentle voice often make conversations difficult, Liz has become her mother's strongest advocate, taking on the role of spokesperson and passionately arguing that a terrible injustice has cost her both her father and her mother. She continues to struggle with the memories of that night. December 23, 2012, the night her husband died. Her inability to recall the events clearly has long fueled investigators' suspicions. But Sandra has remained firm. She did not kill her husband. As she lies awake in her cell, her thoughts drift back to the hours before everything changed. When she and her husband, Jamie Jim Melgar, celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary on the evening of December 22, soaking in their jacuzzi tub and enjoying what should have been a peaceful night together. That night, Sandra said she awoke to the frantic barking of their dogs. Her vision was blurred as she tried to orient herself in the dark. Her head pounded and her body ached. She found herself lying on the closet floor, her hands and feet tied behind her back. Her undergarments soiled, at 5 feet 4 inches tall, with 2 hip replacements limiting her mobility. Sandra tried to stretch her legs and roll far enough to peer under the closet door. But the bindings dug into her skin, and a chair had been wedged under the doorknob from outside, trapping her inside. The bedroom looked ransacked. Drawers hung open, clothes, pill bottles, and books littered the floor. Sandra's black purse and red wallet had been emptied across the blood-speckled white comforter. A small white medical stool at the foot of the bed was smeared with blood, as though a knife had been placed on it. The back of a wooden chair carried streaks of dried red. In the partially filled jacuzzi tub, where they had celebrated just hours earlier, police found a white blouse, a green towel, and a silver 6-inch chef's knife. Blood droplets along the tub's edge painted the chilling picture of what had happened. The knife was later confirmed to be the murder weapon. Sandra and Jim had spent the evening celebrating their enduring love, marking their 32nd wedding anniversary with dinner at their favorite Mexican restaurant. Afterward, they planned to continue the celebration in their jacuzzi. Candles lit, cocktails mixed, strawberries and whipped cream set aside. Even after more than 3 decades of marriage, Jim and Sandra remained deeply connected, something Sandra later emphasized to investigators. Their story began during their senior year at Lamar High School. Jim, with his unruly black hair and slightly awkward teenage mustache, was instantly captivated by the blue-eyed, blonde 17-year-old who sat in front of him in class. Sandra, however, brushed him off for weeks until she finally agreed to join him and a group of friends for ice skating. Only when she showed up did she realize the outing was orchestrated. Jim's best friend vanished moments after she arrived. Jim's teenage charm and hopelessly corny jokes won her over. Sandra admired his humor, intellect, and compassion, while Jim loved her intelligence, grounded personality, and complete lack of pretension. The two became inseparable. And in 1980, 2 years after graduating high school, they married in a simple courthouse ceremony in downtown Houston. In the jacuzzi that anniversary night, Sandra and Jim reminisced about their decades together and talked about the future they still hoped to share. They dreamed aloud about selling their home, traveling across the country, seeing the Grand Canyon, exploring Ireland, watching the Northern Lights. Jim, only 5 months away from retiring after a long career as a computer programmer for the Houston Independent School District, imagined buying a beach house where they could eventually settle after their travels. They took turns giving each other massages, and the evening ended in a moment of intimacy. After 2 peaceful hours in the jacuzzi, Sandra said their dogs suddenly began barking. Jim wrapped a towel around himself and slipped into Sandra's slippers before heading out of the bathroom to calm them. She had no idea it would be the last moment she would ever see her husband alive. When Sandra awoke nearly 15 hours later, she was lying on the closet floor. Her hands and feet bound behind her back, her body stiff and aching, her undergarments soiled. Jim was gone. The dogs were barking again, but this time, she also heard voices inside the house. Terrified, she began screaming. Just after 4:30 a.m. that afternoon, Jim's brother, Herman Melgar, stood outside the front door, confused by the silence. Jim had invited Herman and his family over for dinner, but now neither he nor Sandra were answering the phone or the doorbell. Jim's black truck was still in the driveway, and Sandra's silver car sat in the open garage. Herman told his family to stay near the front step while he checked the backyard. Looking over the fence, he noticed a plastic tarp hanging from the pergola, a sign of the home improvement project Jim had been working on. Returning to the driveway, Herman decided to try the laundry room door inside the garage. If it was locked, he planned to leave. But to his surprise, the door opened. Inside, the house was dim, gray, and stifling. With all the blinds drawn, the dogs barked frantically as Herman opened the front door, creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere that his daughter Marissa Campos later described with a shiver. Something just didn't feel right, she recalled. Then they heard the muffled screams. Herman rushed toward the back of the house and found a large chair wedged against the bathroom closet door. He pushed it aside and discovered Sandra on the floor in a black satin nightgown, crying out for help. Herman and his wife, Maria, tried to untie the ropes binding Sandra's arms and legs. Herman grabbed a pair of scissors from the counter to cut through the tight restraints. The whole time, Sandra kept repeating, "Where's Jim? Where's Jim?" Her arms showed multiple bruises, including a dark one on her left bicep. Once she was free, she staggered into the bedroom and immediately saw Jim's feet sticking out of the closet. She knelt to check his pulse, but his cold, pale, naked body made it clear he was dead. Sandra gently covered him with a blue jacket. Maria then led her back to the bathroom. Sandra was hysterical when paramedics arrived, making it difficult for her to communicate with Stephanie Roberts, the first medic on the scene. Roberts noted in her report that Sandra appeared to be in shock, cycled between crying spells, and had no concept of time. Sandra believed it was still around 1 o'clock a.m. She had no idea it was already evening and that roughly 15 hours had passed nearby. In the bedroom closet lay her husband, Jim, with whom she had lived for 32 years, dead. He had suffered 31 stab wounds to his chest and hands. The closet walls were stained with blood. A gray telephone cord bound his ankles. According to the medical examiner, every wound was defensive. Jim had fought desperately for his life. One blow had nearly severed his right thumb, which explained the extensive blood spatter throughout the closet and bedroom. Police observed bruising on Sandra's hands and arms, along with a small scratch on her left thumb. There was no visible blood on her. Sandra told officers that after Jim went to bring the dogs inside, she got out of the jacuzzi and walked into her closet to get dressed. The next thing she remembers is waking up at an unknown time in the closet. She recalled screaming for help at one point, but believed she may have slipped back into unconsciousness, possibly due to a seizure. Sandra's health had long been complicated by several medical conditions, including lupus, rheumatoid arthritis, and grand mal seizures. Because of the seizures, she had resigned from her job as a licensed vocational nurse, believing she could no longer safely perform her duties. In the weeks leading up to Jim's death, she had been experiencing auras, the warning signs that a seizure was coming. She explained to police that after seizures, she often slept for hours, waking up confused, disoriented, and in significant pain while crime scene investigators combed through the house. Sandra was taken to an interrogation room at the Harris County Sheriff's Office. She complained repeatedly about the cold temperature, saying she was shaking and freezing. Sergeant Sean Carrizal and Detective James Doucet questioned her for nearly 3 hours about the 36 hours leading up to Jim's death. Sandra spoke softly, said she had a headache, and struggled to maintain her composure. She was able to recall certain moments clearly: removing her boots in the bedroom, changing clothes in the bathroom, and details of their conversation in the jacuzzi. But her memory was hazier in other areas, and she admitted she was having trouble remembering everything. She initially claimed Jim had been outside with the dogs for 15 minutes before she got out of the jacuzzi, but later said it might have been only 5 minutes. When asked about the inconsistency, Sandra admitted that she was terrible with time. She was just guessing. When Sean asked about their future plans, Sandra leaned forward, buried her face in her hands, and began to cry. Sean suggested she might have had a role in Jim's death, but Sandra abruptly cut him off. Detective James encouraged her to take a polygraph and asked if she was familiar with the exam and willing to try one. Sandra refused. She said she was nervous, shaking, cold, and afraid the results would be used against her. She insisted she needed to speak with an attorney first. The detectives tried to reassure her that they weren't trying to pin something on her. Her refusal, however, seemed to frustrate Douay, who took it as a sign she might be hiding something. As the interrogation neared its end, the detectives grew increasingly frustrated with what they saw as gaps in her memory. They questioned how she could have blacked out while her husband, whom she claimed to love deeply, was being brutally stabbed just feet away. They asked why she hadn't heard him scream. Sean and James eventually stepped out of the cold, cramped interview room, leaving Sandra alone, crying with her face buried in her hands. Later that night, Sean contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office to pursue murder charges. Sandra remained at the station while crime scene investigators continued combing through her home. Ultimately, prosecutors declined to file charges, citing insufficient evidence. News of Jim's murder spread quickly through the neighborhood. Worried residents gathered outside, speaking in low voices about the possibility of a home invasion gone wrong and wondering whether the killer might return. Some neighbors responded by installing new cameras, security lights, and additional locks. Neighbors described the Melgers as a quiet, private couple who mostly kept to themselves. Occasionally, they would see Jim working in the yard or Sandra coming and going through the garage. One neighbor later recalled being in his garage until 1 a.m., the night of the murder. Noted that he hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. 2 days after the murder, Liz met with Sean and James. She told them that several items were missing from the house, including a bedroom television and bottles of Sandra's hydrocodone and phenobarbital. She had also previously informed detectives about a backpack containing a gaming console and games that had been left in the garage. Liz continued making follow-up calls, hoping something might help. Eventually, investigators stopped responding, leaving both Liz and Sandra uncertain about the status of the case. A year and a half later, in July 2014, Sandra was quietly indicted for Jim's murder by a grand jury. Because grand jury proceedings are sealed under state law, the public had no insight into what evidence or testimony was presented. Even after the indictment, the case moved slowly. Over the next 3 years, it passed through the hands of at least 4 different prosecutors before landing on the desk of Colleen Barnett in May 2017. Barnett had recently returned to the DA's office after a 4-year break under newly elected district attorney, Kim Ogg. Throughout her 24-year career, she had earned a reputation for thoroughness and fairness. According to colleagues and defense attorneys who had tried cases against her, she had prosecuted more than 70 murder trials, including the capital murder case of Suzanne Basso, who was executed for luring a mentally disabled man to Texas with promises of marriage and then killing him. Barnett understood the challenges of Sandra's case: no clear motive, no confession, and no direct forensic evidence tying Sandra to Jim's death. During the 13-day trial in August 2017, Barnett portrayed Sandra as a calculating wife who had methodically planned Jim's murder, luring him into their bedroom with the promise of intimacy. According to the prosecution, Sandra tied Jim's ankles with a gray telephone cord before stabbing him. Barnett pointed to a bag of adult toys found on the bed, which Sandra said was a gag gift from a friend, as proof that she had staged the scene to support her story. Barnett acknowledged that she could not present a definitive motive, offering the jury several possible explanations instead. Jim's Houston Independent School District life insurance policy, or Sandra's alleged desire to end their marriage, but being unable to divorce because of her Jehovah's Witness faith. Sandra's attorney, George Maxecrist, presented a very different narrative. He described Sandra as a vulnerable, physically fragile woman who had been railroaded by investigators determined to pin the crime on her. He emphasized the fact that detectives had attempted to charge Sandra with murder while the crime scene investigation team was still processing the evidence, suggesting that the investigators had a biased view from the outset. First emphasized the absence of physical evidence tying Sandra to the crime. There was no trace of her blood at the scene, nor any cuts on her hands. He presented an alternate explanation that Sandra had been the victim of a home invasion, struck on the head, bound inside her closet, and left helpless while intruders murdered her husband. For the jury, the courtroom showdown between Barnett and Seacrest often resembled a heavyweight boxing match, with the two attorneys trading strategic blows. One of Barnett's strongest punches came through the testimony of Celestina Rossi, a blood spatter analyst and crime scene reconstruction expert with the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. Rossi testified that the scene did not support the theory of a home invasion. There were no signs of forced entry. The bedroom dresser drawers had not been rifled through, and a lit candle on Jim's nightstand indicated no struggle had taken place near the closet where Jim was killed. Rossi explained that most of the blood was concentrated inside the closet, aside from spatter on the back of a chair, the medical stool, and a few speckles on the comforter. She believed this spatter came from damage to an artery near Jim's thumb. She agreed with the medical examiner that all of Jim's injuries were defensive wounds. She also pointed out that Jim's loaded handgun, found inches from his body, appeared untouched. After 8 hours of deliberation over several days, the jury found Sandra guilty of murder. They sentenced her to 27 years in prison, far below the 99-year maximum. When District Judge Kelly Johnson read the verdict, Sandra let out a sharp cry and nearly collapsed into her seat. The courtroom, packed with supporters convinced the trial would end in her exoneration, fell silent in disbelief. For weeks, they had tried to reassure Sandra that everything would be fine. But in an instant, that hope shattered. As she was escorted out of the courtroom, wearing a red blazer and leaning heavily on her cane, Sandra stopped to embrace Liz one final time. When they pulled apart, Liz collapsed to the floor. She recalled that she just remembered the room spinning and that she had felt completely alone. She said that everyone had expected a not guilty verdict, and when it hadn't come, she couldn't even describe it. She added that she had already lost her dad, that the person who had done it had walked free, and that her mom was now paying the price. She concluded that she had lost both of her parents to a justice system that had gotten everything wrong. Sandra's supporters directed their anger at Barnett, accusing her of twisting Sandra's statements, weaponizing her religious beliefs, and building a narrative that had no basis in reality. The jury foreman, however, insisted that Barnett's interpretation of events made the most sense. He said Sandra's shifting timeline, when they returned home, how long Jim had been out of the jacuzzi, when she went to the closet, undermined her credibility. He also questioned the authenticity of her reported seizure, noting that her medical records did not reflect any instability in her condition and that she never mentioned a seizure during her post-murder neurologist appointment. A month after the verdict, Seacrest filed a motion for a new trial, laying out in an 88-page brief why he believed Sandra had been wrongfully convicted. He argued that the investigation was deeply flawed, led by detectives who From the beginning, we're guided by a predetermined theory rather than evidence. According to Seacrest, the prosecution's case rested on speculation and assumptions that had no solid foundation. Sandy didn't kill Jamie, he insisted. However, Judge Johnson denied the motion, initiating what could become a long and difficult appeals process. Sandra's final chance to prove her innocence. When interviewed behind a glass partition at the prison's visitation center this past July, Sandra once again firmly denied killing her husband. Sandra now places her hopes in the appeals process, or in the possibility of parole. Her first eligibility date is February 2031, at which point she will be 71 years old. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jennifer Paulson. Jennifer Paulson was born on June 23, 1979, in Washington, USA. She grew up in a close-knit family filled with love and warmth. Jennifer has two older brothers and shares a strong bond with them. She was a kind child who absorbed everything around her and made friends easily. As a result, she had a large circle of friends and could connect with anyone, regardless of their differences. Jennifer graduated from the Christian Academy, where she excelled academically. She was always eager to help her classmates who were struggling with their studies. In addition to her academic achievements, Jennifer was active in extracurricular activities. She published the weekly school news, tutored part-time, and participated in volleyball, basketball, and softball. A prominent feature of Jennifer and her family was their strong faith. She attended church services every Sunday. After graduating, she attended Seattle Pacific University, about an hour's drive from her parents' home. She set her sights on becoming a teacher, wanting to use her academic achievements to help her community. She excelled in school, earning a bachelor's degree in teaching and then a master's degree in education. During her time in college, Jennifer also volunteered with low-income families, focusing on helping children prepare for college. She has always believed that education is the key to building a successful future. After graduating, Jennifer sought employment and began her career as a substitute teacher at Pierce County Schools. Eager to advance her career, she worked hard to secure a permanent teaching position. She was soon hired by several schools, and in 2004, she became a full-time teacher at Hunt Middle School and Stanley Elementary School. In 2007, she joined Bernie Elementary School, where she dedicated herself to teaching children with special needs and quickly became a favorite among the fifth graders. She believed that everyone deserved a chance at a better future, and helping them achieve that was her true calling as a teacher. She worked with students who faced serious challenges, including fifth graders who were still unable to read. Jennifer had an extremely busy schedule, balancing her teaching responsibilities with her efforts to support her students. While still attending college, she worked part-time at the cafeteria on campus. There, she met a new transfer student from another school named Jed Waits. He also worked at the cafeteria, and those who knew him well had nothing negative to say about him. One striking trait that people who don't know Jed will notice is his unusual style of dress. He often appears somber and frequently wears black. His friends believe that this preference for dark clothing stems from his creative eccentricity, which has been evident since a young age. Jed is an artist involved in a variety of creative activities. He has acted in plays, drawn cartoons for newspapers and yearbooks, and enjoys creating posters and flyers for youth groups. Jed is artistically gifted and can quickly come up with unique creative projects and execute them efficiently. This ability has earned him the respect of his teachers. Additionally, he leads his church's youth group and meets with students monthly to discuss spiritual topics and explore the Bible. Overall, he is a kind and optimistic person. When Jennifer met Jed, they worked together and socialized in the same group, where others often found Jed uncomfortable to talk to. His jokes were frequently considered inappropriate, dark, and confusing. Additionally, he was sometimes rude, even to Jennifer. Although there was no romantic relationship between them, it was clear that Jed had feelings for her. Jennifer, on the other hand, showed no interest in pursuing any relationship. She focused on her studies and had found a job that took up most of her free time. One day at school, Jed decided to express his feelings for Jennifer by asking her out. However, she reiterated what she had told many others before: she was not ready for a relationship until she had established her career. Jed struggled with the rejection, and in a moment of anger, he hit Jennifer, which caused a conflict between them. They resolved their differences amicably but chose to distance themselves, continuing their studies like other students. Both Jennifer and Jed graduated in 2003, with Jennifer earning a degree in special education and Jed earning a degree in English. Their friendship never recovered. In fact, they barely spoke to each other during their final years of school. After graduating from college, Jennifer moved back home with her family, found a job, and began saving money to buy her dream home. She was focused on her goals and wanted to be independent. However, an old acquaintance disrupted her plans. Somehow, Jed Waits discovered Jennifer's home phone number and called her for the first time 2 years after graduation. He said he had served in the National Guard in Kuwait and had just returned from a war zone. Jennifer was polite throughout the conversation and hoped he wouldn't call again, but from that day on, he started calling her frequently. At first, she ignored the calls, thinking he was just bored and contacting everyone, including her. However, she soon became concerned when Jed began calling multiple times a day, distracting and annoying her. When she asked their mutual friends, she learned that Jed didn't call anyone else. Realizing this made her feel uncomfortable. It seemed like he was obsessing over her, which was alarming. Jennifer told Jed that their relationship was impossible and asked him to stop contacting her. However, it seemed like he wasn't listening. Jed continued to call, forcing Jennifer to turn off her phone to avoid his constant calls. Thankfully, her family supported her during this difficult time. Meanwhile, Jed's parents had separated and moved in with new partners. By the fall of 2006, Jennifer Paulson had saved enough money for a down payment on a house and decided to buy one. She found a suitable place a few miles away from her family and was excited to be independent. She also hoped that the move would stop Jed's calls. To her surprise, just a few days after moving into her new home, she answered the phone and heard his familiar, annoying voice. She hadn't even finished unpacking when the calls started again. For days, she ignored him, hoping that this would stop Jed's obsession. However, her relief did not last long. After a while, he continued to call her persistently. This situation reminded Jennifer of her past experiences, and surprisingly, Jed stopped stalking her for about a year. During this time, Jennifer was able to relax and thought that Jed might have found someone else. However, she was shocked when he called her back, acting as if nothing had changed, as if they had just met yesterday. From that point on, Jed continued to contact her regularly, calling about 10 times a day or even more. This pattern of behavior continued for several months before stopping for a long period. This pattern of harassment occurred several times over the years, following a similar trajectory each time. In 2008, Jed started calling her again, and this time it was even more disturbing because he had become more aggressive. Jennifer had no idea how far his obsession had gone until he showed up at her workplace. He casually walked past her office and entered without hesitation. This was the most terrifying experience for Jennifer. She realized that she had never told him where she worked, which meant he had been stalking her. Jed coming to her school and walking among the children terrified her. When she told her father, Ken Paulson, what was happening, he was fed up with Jed's constant harassment. Ken later called Jed and asked him to stay away from his daughter, warning him that there would be consequences if he didn't. Instead of staying away, Jed sent Jennifer a gift at work, a bouquet of flowers and a teddy bear. He later visited her in person again. During this meeting, Jennifer confronted him and asked him to stop coming to the school, warning that she would report him to the police if he continued to stalk her. She was genuinely worried about his obsessive behavior. Jennifer then informed the principal and school staff about the situation because she was concerned for the safety of the students. Everyone was alerted and prepared to call the police if he showed up at the school again. Unfortunately, Jed did not stop. The police were called to the school, and the principal was extremely concerned about the situation. He even contacted Jed's commanding officer in the National Guard, who revealed that Jed had a troubled military background. The commanding officer stated that Jed had served for nearly 2 years, but he had been behaving inappropriately from the beginning. During that time, he had gotten into several fights, spat on his teammates, and attacked his superiors. He was eventually deployed to Kuwait, where he finished his service without any commendation. The main reason for his discharge was a serious mental health issue. Jennifer became extremely concerned for her safety due to Jed's disturbing behavior. She then decided to file for a restraining order. In the application, she detailed Jed's inappropriate behavior, including repeated phone calls and unusual visits to her workplace. Jennifer Paulson was granted a restraining order, which legally prohibited Jed from coming within 300 meters of her, either at home or at work. While the order provided some peace of mind, Jennifer knew that it would not fully protect her if the harassment continued. She hoped that the police would respond more forcefully, which eased her concerns somewhat. Although she was frightened, she was prepared to take legal action against Jed if necessary. Jed was informed of the restraining order and the serious consequences he would face if he violated it. By this time, Jennifer was emotionally exhausted and showing signs of stress, but with the restraining order in place, she felt more secure in her life. Jennifer was shocked to see Jed's car honking at her in her rearview mirror. She quickly called 911 and explained that there was a restraining order against him and that she felt threatened. Eventually, the police advised her to drive calmly to the station. When she arrived, the police and their cars were waiting for Jed, who was arrested and taken in for immediate questioning. However, he denied the charges and refused to admit to any allegations related to stalking. While awaiting a court decision, the judge ordered Jed to be held in jail but set bail at $10,000. Normally, bail for such charges is around $2,000, but Jed's unpredictable and dangerous behavior prompted the judge to increase it significantly. Unfortunately, this precaution did not keep Jed in jail, as he was able to post bail. For days after his arrest, Jennifer and her family learned that he had been released. Everyone was in a panic. Jennifer chose not to return home, where she would be alone, and she did not go to work until the situation was resolved. She decided to stay with her family for support during this uncertain time. Jennifer decided to visit her mother. When she arrived, her mother greeted her in tears, expressing her fear that Jed would prevent her from entering the house. Jennifer was also very emotional but immediately expressed her desire to pray for Jed in this situation. She remained optimistic and kind, following her family's advice and staying with relatives. Her brothers planned to protect her at home by taking turns watching over her. However, Jennifer did not want to be confined to the house. She planned to continue working and could not abandon her students. On Friday at 7:30 a.m., Jennifer went to work, preparing to teach her first class of the day. About 400 students, from grades 1 through 5, along with teachers and staff, were at the school, unaware that they were in grave danger. Since 5:30 a.m., Jed had been nearby, parked in a hidden spot while he monitored the roads leading to the school, waiting for the right moment to approach his target. Jennifer arrived safely at work, parked in her usual spot, and walked toward the school. Everything seemed normal. Meanwhile, Jed got out of his car. As he approached her, he suddenly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back. She screamed and collapsed on the asphalt, and he shot her 7 more times. A man who lived across the street witnessed the horrific scene through his window. He heard her scream but couldn't get there in time to help her. Jed then pointed his gun at a passerby and fired, but the man miraculously dodged the bullet. News outlets reported on the shooting at the school where Jennifer worked, urging locals to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary, as the shooter had fled. At the time, no details were available about the victims. Jennifer's father received the call, and her parents quickly drove to the school. They were horrified to learn that Jed had finally achieved his goal and were even more devastated to learn of Jennifer's death. The attack caused chaos, allowing the perpetrator to flee by car. Fortunately, several witnesses saw his face and got a good look at the car he used to escape. He was quickly identified as Jed Waits, the person against whom Jennifer had a restraining order. Only 20 minutes had passed when one of the patrol officers stopped Jed's car about 10 kilometers from the school where he had just killed Jennifer Paulson. The officers were cautious during the arrest, but the situation quickly escalated. Jed refused to surrender. He pulled out a gun and opened fire on the officers. Fortunately, the officers were prepared and returned fire immediately. Thankfully, no officers were injured. Jed was found to be carrying multiple weapons, possibly because he had anticipated a confrontation with the police. The patrol officers shot him multiple times, but the injuries were not fatal. Tragically, 30-year-old Jed Waits took his own life. When his family was informed of the incident, they were shocked. They had no idea that Jed had been involved in such activities for years. They could not believe that a once kind person had become a stalker and a murderer. Jed's family was profoundly affected by the school shooting. His parents were devastated, regretting that they had not been aware of Jed's problems and had not sought professional help sooner. For days after the tragedy, more than 1,500 mourners attended Jennifer Paulson's funeral at the city's cathedral, including friends, family, and classmates. She was well loved. Many of Jennifer's students were deeply saddened by the loss, as her family viewed her as a beacon of hope for their future. In memory of Jennifer Paulson, a garden was created on the school grounds, which remains to this day. About 50 students, mostly from her class, along with their families, contributed to the creation of the garden, each processing their loss in their own way. Jennifer's family struggled to come to terms with her tragic death. Her father, Ken Paulson, wanted to honor her memory by helping others. He spent years creating legislation to better protect victims of stalking, which he called the Jennifer Paulson Law. His main goal was to speed up the government's response to these cases to prevent similar incidents from happening again. The law also classifies online stalking as in-person stalking. Additionally, Ken advocated for public disclosure of information about individuals with a history of stalking, allowing people to check their acquaintances against available databases. If Jennifer had access to this information, she might have learned about his past troubles. In November 2008, after a court ordered Jed not to contact her, he attacked another girl. Although she narrowly escaped death and was seriously injured, the police did not intervene to stop Jed. As a result, he continued to stalk Jennifer. In the United States, victims of stalking are often required to provide evidence of stalking and harassment. In many cases, authorities simply issue warnings. When the initiative was finally enacted into law, Ken felt satisfied, believing it would save countless victims from the tragic consequences of stalking. Although he knew it would not bring back the life of his beloved daughter, Jennifer, who had died at the age of 30, he believed his efforts had been worthwhile. On September 4, 1894, a burned body discovered in Philadelphia marks the beginning of a case that will later be buried under myth, exaggeration, and spectacle. At first, the facts appear narrow and technical: a corpse chemically altered, a fire staged to suggest an accident, and a name attached to the remains: Benjamin Freelon Pitezel. What investigators uncover in the days that follow is not a crime of passion or chance, but a deliberate act tied to fraud, identity manipulation, and control. The suspect, publicly known as H. Holmes. As the investigation widens beyond one body and stretches across state and national borders, it becomes clear that Pitezel's murder is not the end of a scheme but its first clue, showing how ordinary trust can be exploited. Holmes was adept at disappearing within his own disguises. In the record, he is a con artist with a long resume, fraud, swindles, shifting identities, moving city to city as if motion itself can erase accountability. But in Philadelphia, motion becomes traceable. A murder charge does not care how charming a man can sound when he lies. And a question forms early. If Holmes was willing to kill the partner he needed for the con, what else was he willing to do once the fraud stopped being enough? What comes next is the pivot investigators cling to, the narrowing from myth to measurable proof. Because Pitezel is not the end of the story, he is the doorway, and behind it, 3 children will vanish into the same trail, forcing the case to expand beyond a single body into a hunt across borders. The man the newspapers call H. Holmes did not begin that way. He was born Herman Webster Mudgett in 1861 in rural New Hampshire. That is the first verifiable fact investigators return to when the story begins to swell beyond control. Accounts from court records and contemporary reports portray his early life as quiet and unremarkable. He studies medicine and anatomy, learning to translate bodies into paperwork. The investigation file suggests that even before Chicago, there were hints of fraud, insurance schemes using cadavers, false claims, debts left behind like footprints in snow. Nothing sensational, but a pattern emerges, profiting by manipulating death without causing it, at least at first. Allegedly, what makes Holmes dangerous is not violence alone, it is adaptability. He marries more than once, he abandons his spouses without divorcing, he assumes roles easily: doctor, entrepreneur, husband, widower. Each identity overlaps with another. When one collapses, he steps sideways into the next. Investigators later note how difficult it is to chart his movements because his life is not linear, it is layered. By the late 1882, Mudgett had fully recast himself. He becomes Henry Howard Holmes. Chicago offers anonymity and opportunity. The city is expanding. People are arriving faster than records can keep up. Holmes understands something crucial. In a growing city, absence does not always register as an alarm. Holmes is not hiding in the shadows. He operates in daylight. He runs pharmacies. He hires workers, then dismisses them before they fully understand what they're building. According to later testimony, he keeps financial control tight and personal details vague. No one ever sees the full structure. Investigators looking back see this as preparation, not for a single crime, but for insulation. When questions come, there is always another address, another name, another explanation ready. And that raises the next question, one that law enforcement would not fully confront until years later. When a man practices becoming someone else for so long, how do you prove who he was when the crimes occurred? Because Chicago is where Holmes stops merely borrowing from death and begins designing around it. On the corner of West 63rd Street and Wallace Avenue, in Chicago's Englewood neighborhood, a building began to rise in the early 1892s. It is later called a castle, but at the time, it is something simpler and more deceptive. A mixed-use structure with shops on the ground floor and rooms above. The fact is clear and documented. Holmes owns the property. He oversees its construction, and he does so in fragments. Workers are hired and fired in quick succession. According to later testimony, no one stays long enough to understand the full layout. Staircases lead nowhere. Hallways bend oddly. Rooms are sealed off. Whether these features were intentionally designed for murder has been debated for more than a century. What is officially confirmed is narrower. Holmes controlled access, withheld plans, and ensured that no single person ever saw the whole. The hotel sits near the grounds of the 1893 World's Columbian Exposition. Chicago is flooded with visitors. Holmes advertises jobs. Young women arrive alone, seeking work. He offers lodging. Some of these women are later documented as employees or acquaintances. Some disappear from the historical record shortly after. Investigators would later struggle to determine how many vanishings can be directly tied to Holmes and how many were absorbed into the noise of a city in motion. Years later, when police eventually search building, they do not find a neatly preserved crime scene. They find alterations, removals, a structure already stripped of much physical proof. Sensational accounts would later exaggerate what was found. The investigation file is more restrained. It notes shoots, locked rooms, and evidence of chemical use. Enough to disturb, not enough to convict. This becomes a critical investigative problem. If the hotel can't speak clearly, the case must rest on something else: paper, letters, movements, and the people who left Chicago with Holmes and never returned. That shifts the focus away from the building itself and toward the relationships formed inside it. Because the next provable crime does not happen in Englewood. It happens on the road. At the center of that road is Benjamin Freelon Pitezel, still alive, still trusting, and about to be used not as a partner, but as a template. Benjamin enters the record not as a victim, but as a collaborator. That is the first uncomfortable fact. He is a carpenter, a father, a man with debts and limited options. By 1894, he is working with Holmes on a plan that appears, on paper, almost harmless: a life insurance fraud. Benjamin will fake his death. Holmes will collect the payout. They will split the money. According to court testimony, Benjamin agrees. The scheme is documented. The trust is real. There is no sign, at least initially, that Benjamin believes his life is at risk. He writes letters to his wife. He follows instructions. He rents a room in Philadelphia under an assumed name. This is where the deviation occurs. Benjamin does not disappear as planned. He dies. The medical evidence presented at trial is precise for its time. Benjamin is killed before the fire. Chloroform is found in his system. His throat is cut. The burning comes after. The scene is staged to support the fraud, but the order of events betrays intent. According to the investigation file and trial record, this is not a mistake or escalation. It is a decision. What follows deepens the crime. Holmes does not flee immediately. Instead, he steps into the role Benjamin can no longer play. He meets with the insurance company. He presents documentation. He convinces them of the death. He collects the money. Then he turns to Benjamin's family, not to confess, but to continue the lie. Holmes tells Mrs. Benjamin that her husband is alive and hiding. He offers to protect 3 of her children while authorities search for the missing man. This is one of the coldest moments in the case, because it is fully unnecessary. The money has already been paid. The murder is complete, yet Holmes chooses control over distance. This is no longer about fraud. It is about power. According to later testimony and correspondence, Holmes moved the children across state lines. He writes letters in Benjamin's name. He keeps the family compliant with hope. And this raises the next investigative question, one that will pull federal authorities into the case. If Holmes has already killed to secure the fraud, why keep the children at all? The answer will not come quickly. It will come through travel records, rented rooms, and a detective who decides to follow the letters. After Holmes is arrested on insurance fraud charges, the task of finding the Pitezel children falls to Detective Frank Geyer of the Philadelphia Police. The fact guiding his work is simple and devastating. 3 children are missing, and the last confirmed adult with them is now in custody. According to the investigation file and later court testimony, Holmes has left a trail on paper notes sent to Mrs. Pitezel, instructions about where the children are supposedly being kept, and explanations that shift just enough to delay panic. Geyer does not challenge the letters. He follows them. He heads west, then north, Indianapolis, Detroit, Toronto. At each stop, he checks boarding houses, hotels, and rented rooms, questioning landlords who recall a quiet man traveling with children. The descriptions match: calm, polite, passing through. The trail cools, but it doesn't disappear. In Toronto, the investigation reaches its first irreversible turn. Geyer finds a rented house tied directly to Holmes. Inside, the evidence is not symbolic, it is physical. 2 of the Pitezel children are discovered buried in the cellar. According to the coroner's findings, they were killed deliberately. The cause of death is not accidental. The setting offers no ambiguity. The case has crossed from suspected homicide into documented multiple murder. Geyer does not stop. He returns to the United States and continues the search for the 3rd child, Howard Pitezel. In Indianapolis, the final location resolves the last uncertainty. The remains of the boy were found in a chimney. The forensic conclusions align with what was already known. The children were killed after being moved repeatedly. Their deaths are not tied to panic or impulse. They are spaced, planned, and concealed. This sequence becomes the backbone of the prosecution. Unlike the Chicago property, unlike the rumors, the children's deaths are anchored to places, dates, and actions Holmes cannot reframe. Geyer transforms suspicion into a narrative that the court can understand, and it leads to a question Holmes can no longer escape. If the murders of the children were unnecessary to the fraud, what did Holmes gain by keeping them alive long enough to move them and kill them, one by one? The trial begins in October 1895, not with legends, but with restraint. The prosecution makes a deliberate choice. Despite the growing number of suspected victims and the mounting public pressure, Holmes is charged with a single murder, the killing of Benjamin Freeland Pitezel. This is the fact the state believes it can prove beyond doubt. Outside, newspapers speculate about dozens, even hundreds of victims. Inside, the judge limits the scope. Rumor is excluded. Sensation is filtered out. What remains is evidence that can survive cross-examination. The medical testimony is central. Doctors testify that Benjamin was rendered unconscious with chloroform before his throat was cut. The fire came later. This sequence dismantles the defense's suggestion of an accidental death during a fraud gone wrong. According to the trial record, the jury is shown how the scene was staged and how the chemistry contradicts Holmes's account. Holmes takes the stand. He speaks calmly. He denies the murder. He shifts blame. At times, he suggests that Benjamin died accidentally, that the children were alive when he last saw them, and that others are responsible. His statements are internally inconsistent. Dates slide. Locations blur. The prosecution does not rush him. They let the contradictions accumulate. The feeling in the courtroom changes as the trial progresses. Holmes's intelligence is evident, but so is his detachment. Witnesses describe his behavior after the murder: collecting insurance money, managing correspondence, and maintaining control. The jury is asked to consider not just what happened in that Philadelphia room, but what Holmes did afterward, and why. Detective Geyer's findings are introduced carefully, not to expand the charges, but to establish pattern and intent. The children's deaths are referenced as context, not as counts. The message is subtle and devastating. This was not an isolated decision. On November 30, 1895, the jury returns its verdict: guilty. Holmes is sentenced to death. The legal system has spoken, narrowly and decisively, but conviction does not bring clarity. Instead, it creates a new incentive. With appeals exhausted and execution scheduled, Holmes begins to talk, not to the court, but to the public. With the verdict secured and the sentence fixed, Holmes enters a different phase of the case, one not governed by evidence, rules, or judges' instructions. He begins to confess, not once, but many times. Each version is different. Each one is offered to a newspaper willing to pay. The fact investigators and historians agree on is this: Holmes gave multiple confessions in the months leading up to his execution, and they contradict one another. In some accounts, he claims 27 victims. In others, far fewer. At times, he insists he feels remorse. In others, he describes himself as detached, even hollow. According to contemporary journalism and later analysis, Holmes understood the value of narrative. He knew attention could be monetized. Reporters compete for access. Headlines grow darker. Numbers inflate. The public appetite for horror expands faster than verification can follow. Holmes feeds that appetite selectively. He offers just enough detail to sound credible, then shifts the frame. Names change. Locations blur. The confessions become performances. Investigators are skeptical. According to the investigation file and later scholarly review, many claims Holmes makes cannot be corroborated by missing persons reports, timelines, or physical evidence. Some alleged victims are later found alive. What remains provable stays small: Benjamin Pitezel and Pitezel's 3 children. This distinction matters, because it separates what Holmes did from what he wanted to be remembered for. His confessions inflate his myth. The record deflates it. Holmes, allegedly, exaggerates his crimes for profit and control, even as his own life narrows to a cell. The feeling here is unsettling, not because of what Holmes says, but because of how easily the story slips away from the victims. Their names are overshadowed by his. Their lives are reduced to numbers that rise and fall depending on the edition. In his final statements, Holmes claims his body is inhabited by the devil. It is one of his most quoted lines. Investigators dismiss it. There is no evidentiary value. It explains nothing. It only redirects attention. On a May morning in Philadelphia, the state will end Holmes's ability to speak and fix his story in silence. At 10:13 am, on May 7, 1896, in Moyamensing Prison, Philadelphia, H. Holmes is led to the gallows. This is the final, verifiable fact in the case. The execution is orderly, witnessed, documented. Holmes does not struggle. According to official accounts, his death is not immediate. The drop does not break his neck. He dies slowly, over several minutes, as the crowd watches in silence. Holmes's last requests are practical. He asks that his body be buried in concrete, deep enough to prevent grave robbers. Even in death, he seeks control, over access, over narrative, over what remains. With the execution complete, the legal case closes, but resolution does not follow. Holmes leaves behind a vacuum filled quickly by myth. Newspapers continue to publish inflated victim counts. The Chicago building is retroactively transformed into a chamber of horrors. Details are added that cannot be traced to police records or court testimony. Over time, the legend overtakes the evidence. The fact remains narrower and colder. Holmes is a convicted murderer of Benjamin Pitezel. He is responsible, beyond dispute, for the deaths of Pitezel's 3 children. Everything beyond that exists in contested space, some possible, some exaggerated, some invented outright. The investigation never produces a definitive number of total victims. That uncertainty is not a failure of justice. It is the limit of proof. The feeling that lingers is not fear, but unease. Holmes did not rely on brute force or chaos. He relied on systems, insurance, housing, trust, anonymity. He exploited how people assume paperwork equals safety and how movement can erase attention. The case exposes a social vulnerability as much as an individual crime. Holmes's name endures in history books and documentaries. Their names surface more quietly, carried by court records and burial sites. And that is the final question the case leaves behind, unresolved and still relevant. When society remembers the architect of a crime more vividly than the people erased by it, who is justice really serving? Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case, the case of Cassie Jo Stoddart. We will explore the tragic story of Cassie Jo Stoddart, a high school senior from Pocatello, Idaho, whose murder was influenced by the movie, Scream. Let's go back to 2006, when the Scream franchise was at its peak. Even though the first film was released in 1996, long before Cassie's murder, Cassie was an honor student at her high school in Pocatello. She attended classes with her boyfriend, Matt Beckham, and her friends, Brian Draper and Tori Adamczyk, and they often spent their free time together. Cassie was a beautiful young girl with long, flowing dark hair, embodying both beauty and intelligence. In a 2016 interview with Idaho Magazine, Cassie's brother Andrew Stoddart described her as artistic, with a passion for drawing and music. She was a great role model and a typical girl. Cassie's classmates and friends, Brian and Tori, were very interested in the horror movie Scream and other similar films. They also enjoyed making their own videos, with Brian often filming Cassie. Eventually, Brian and Tori began recording discussions about murders. In one recording, Brian said, "We've already found a victim, and maybe it's our girl. You know, we need a sacrifice, and we have to go for it. She will be the first on the list. She'll be all alone in a big dark house." This particular video was filmed on September 2, 2006, and the audio was later found on a videotape that was given to the police, along with other evidence for the murder case. Brian's lawyer argued that this tape should be disregarded since the friends were merely creating a horror film. That night, Cassie was supposed to stay home to care for her aunt and uncle's pets while they were away on business. She invited her boyfriend Matt over to watch movies and keep her company to avoid feeling bored and lonely. Cassie's mother had prohibited her from bringing guests over, but she still told Matt to come. Later on, Brian and Tori showed up, even though she hadn't invited them. They all chatted together and took her uncle's dogs for a walk to keep them calm. To minimize noise, Cassie eventually locked the dogs in a room and the boys started goofing around. At one point, Brian and Tori decided to leave the house where Matt and Cassie were and go to the movie theater instead of watching Kill Bill 2. According to court records from the 6th Judicial District Court of Idaho, they got into Tori's red car and drove away. They stopped alongside the road to park, then got out to change into dark pants, shirts, gloves, and white masks. Both of them also grabbed large knives. Afterward, they drove back and parked near the house again. Dressed in their costumes and armed with knives, they walked down the driveway toward the house. To enter, they broke a basement window. Once inside, Brian and Tori began making noise by stomping and banging, trying to lure Cassie and Matt downstairs to scare them. They created chaos by throwing objects and breaking things. Then, they found the circuit box and switched off the lights in the house. After some time, they turned the lights back on, but Cassie and Matt still did not come downstairs. Meanwhile, they heard that Matt's mother had arrived to take him home. At 10:30 p.m., Matt started to feel uneasy, claiming that something strange was happening with the lights in the house. His mother suggested that Cassie spend the night at their place, but Cassie declined, saying she needed to take the dogs out early. Matt left with his mother, leaving Cassie alone. Once he was gone, the guys turned off the electricity again and went back upstairs. At the top of the stairs, Brian opened a closet door to make noise and scare Cassie. Meanwhile, the dogs were growling behind a door in the room as Brian and Tori entered the living room, where Cassie was lying on the couch. When she saw them, she jumped up and asked who they were. Tori moved in front of Brian and approached Cassie, who shouted that she wasn't scared of them and could handle them herself. Brian heard Cassie's screams and saw Tori raise a knife and attack her multiple times. She collapsed to the floor, making a gurgling sound. Tori turned to Brian and said, "I know what I did. We have to kill her." He then stabbed Cassie several more times. "I just killed Cassie. This isn't a joke. I stabbed her in the throat and I watched her lifeless body fall. I killed her." It all felt surreal to Brian, but everything happened so quickly. "We need to act fast," he said to Tori as they were in the car. Tori and Brian were celebrating, shouting, "We did it. It was so easy." The group in Tori's car visited his house, but didn't stay long. They first entered the garage, where they took blue garbage bags. After removing their costumes, they packed the costumes and knives into the bags and changed into pre-prepared street clothes. They also grabbed a bottle of liquid and placed everything in the back seat of Tori's car before leaving the garage. On their way, they bought matches and drove to Black Rock Canyon. There, they went down a trail to try to burn the bag containing the costumes and knives. However, the liquid wasn't very flammable, so the items wouldn't catch fire. As a result, Tori and Brian dug a hole and buried everything, covering it with branches. Afterward, they drove around the area for a while before returning to Tori's house to watch a movie. Cassie's aunt and uncle, Allison and Frank Contreras, returned on September 24. When she hadn't heard from her daughter at the expected time and hadn't received a call, Cassie's mother went to their house soon after. Frank, Cassie's uncle, came out to meet her mother and wouldn't let her inside because Cassie's body had been found on the living room floor, with dried blood around it. The police were called and they advised not to touch anything. When the officers arrived, they took the body for examination and began their investigation. They discovered that the intruders had broken a window to enter through the basement, which was in disarray, and the electrical panel was open, raising further questions. There were 2 Dobermans locked in separate rooms. If they had been nearby, they would have prevented anyone from getting close to the girl. This raises the question of why Cassie locked them up, as a stranger would not have been able to do so. The autopsy showed that Cassie died from multiple stab wounds, 26 in total, with at least 9 being fatal. These wounds impacted her heart, lungs, and liver, leaving her with no chance of survival. It was determined that 2 different knives were used in the attack, suggesting the involvement of 2 assailants. There was no evidence of abuse assault, and her death occurred overnight between September 22 and 23. The first person questioned was Cassie's boyfriend, Matt. He explained that on the evening of September 22, he was at Cassie's house when Brian and Tori arrived. However, after an hour, they grew bored and left. On September 23, Matt attempted to contact Cassie by phone but received no response. He was unable to visit her house to check on her because he lacked transportation. His family had only one car, which his mother took to work. Matt found out about Cassie's murder on Sunday, September 24, when Cassie's mother called him to ask what he had done with her daughter. Matt thought that Brian and Tori treated Cassie well and might have even had feelings for her, as they sometimes flirted. During a detailed interrogation with Tori on September 24 at his home, where his parents were present, Tori stated that he and Brian had gone to a party with Cassie and Matt. However, since no one else showed up, they decided to leave her and Matt alone, and they went to the movie. When asked for more details, Tori could not recall any specifics about the movie they claimed to have watched, only mentioning that after the movie, he and Brian returned home. The following day, the police interviewed Brian with his mother present. Brian's version of events that evening closely matched Tori's. They left Cassie to go to the cinema, but like Tori, Brian couldn't recall the plot of the movie they supposedly watched 2 days earlier. He expressed distress upon hearing about Cassie's death and had trouble accepting that she was gone. When officers spoke with the cinema attendant, she confirmed that neither Tori nor Brian had actually been to the movie, as she recognized them and would have remembered their presence. This prompted the police to take a closer look at the friends. On September 25, the detective interviewed an anonymous individual at a high school, which revealed the following information. Tori and Brian had a strong fascination with knives, guns, and horror movies. They were so passionate about these films that they even wrote a screenplay centered around a murder. The witness reported that Cassie had asked her friends to film her for this project, and about 2 months prior, Tori had allowed Cassie to read the script. Tori expressed his enjoyment of movies like Scream and Friday the 13th, and he owned a collection of knives stored in his bedroom closet. Additionally, he had created a glove similar to the one seen in A Nightmare on Elm Street. The witness also noted that Tori bragged about being capable of committing the perfect crime, attributing this confidence to his extensive viewing of murder films and his habit of taking notes on evading capture. At school, Tori would often joke around by pretending to hit others and simulating throat-cutting gestures. On September 22, 2006, Tori had invited this witness to Cassie's party, but she declined. Furthermore, the police found out that Tori had been in love with Cassie for the past 2 to 3 years. On September 27, 2006, Brian and Tori were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Although they were minors at the time, they were charged as adults. During the interrogation, Tori broke down in tears and confessed that Brian was responsible for the crime. In response, Brian accused Tori, claiming Brian was present at the scene but did not take part. He insisted that their intention was only to scare Cassie, not to kill her. However, Brian later admitted that he had struck Cassie at Tori's command. He also led investigators to the locations where they burned their costumes and buried the unburned items. The police excavated the area and discovered 2 masks, clothing, shoes, and knives. Tori and Brian had removed their socks and buried everything since the clothing and shoes were covered in blood. They had planned to change outfits beforehand. Most notably, the police found a videotape at the bottom of the pit that provided undeniable evidence of the crime. The 40-minute recording showed Tori and Brian painting masks they had bought from a store. Later in the video, they recorded a message to future serial killers, wishing them success and discussing their plans to target Cassie and her boyfriend, Matt. Fortunately, Matt's mother insisted he go home that day, which ultimately saved him. The tape also featured an interview that Tori conducted with Cassie and Matt on the afternoon of September 22, during which he indicated on screen that the two would soon be killed. Additionally, during a search of Tori's house, the police found a red notebook containing notes about planning a murder, as well as a list of 20 people that Brian and Tori intended to kill over the next 2 years, targeting one person each month. As investigators looked into the individuals on the list, they discovered that it included teachers, friends, girlfriends, and even a relative. The police were startled to uncover the connections these potential victims had with Tori and Brian, as most of these relationships appeared normal. Many people were shocked to learn that they were being targeted for murder. It's important to note that Tori and Brian did not fit the mold of typical victims of bullying or abuse. They seemed perfectly normal. Brian Draper was found guilty on April 17, 2007, and Tori Adamczyk was found guilty on June 8, 2007. On August 21, 2007, both received mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder, and an additional 30 years for conspiracy to commit murder. They began serving their sentences in a correctional facility in Idaho. The verdict upset the families of both Tori and Brian, who had hoped for leniency due to their young ages. Tori's relatives were especially outraged. In 2010, the attorneys for Brian and Tori filed separate appeals to the state Supreme Court, but both were denied. Tori's family continued to seek changes to his sentence for over a decade. Ultimately, in 2017, Tori Adamczyk lost the final court case that could have affected his sentence, ensuring that both Tori and Brian would spend the rest of their lives in prison. Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Emily Godest. On the evening of November 9, 2007, Johan and Emily were driving on a small country road in Châtenay, France. It was a typical trip for them until he noticed a large dark object suddenly darting across the road. He reacted, but he wasn't quick enough. The car skidded into a ditch and crashed into a tree. After the collision, Johan tried to help his girlfriend, Emily. The car was damaged and caught fire. She was engulfed in flames and fell to the ground, suffering severe injuries that left almost half of her body burned beyond recognition. Despite her condition, she was still alive, so he immediately called for emergency services and waited for the paramedics and police to arrive. While Emily suffered life-threatening injuries, Johan only had minor injuries. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene. Emily was a history student with dreams of becoming a teacher. She was known for her bright and sociable personality, and she came from a wealthy family with 3 brothers and 1 sister. Her father often indulged her every wish. At midnight, Emily's father was informed about the accident involving her. He rushed to the hospital, where he found her in critical condition and on life support. The fire had severely burned her. The medical staff had to cut away her clothing in pieces, and the doctors could not predict her chances of survival. In conversation with the police, Johan quickly described the incident. He explained that they was on her way to a party in a nearby town that evening. He seeing a dark figure that looked like a wild boar suddenly run into the headlights, causing the accident. After their car crashed into a tree, he lost consciousness briefly and felt disoriented. When he regained awareness, he saw flames rising from the girl's head and spreading to her back. She was focused on escaping from the vehicle and did not notice him. When Johan ran out of the car to assist her, he found that she had already gotten outside. Meanwhile, the fire seemed to grow stronger. He grabbed a nearby bottle of water to try to extinguish the flames, but it was ineffective. Next, he tried using a fire extinguisher from the trunk, but it did not work. Johann took off his jacket and used it to smother the flames on Emily. In the end, he was able to put out the fire by covering her with his body to cut off the oxygen supply. Johann's explanation seemed credible, and the police found evidence at the accident site that looked like clumps of earth disturbed by an animal. It's likely that the headlights startled a wild boar, which attempted to cross the road and caused the accident. Nearby the burned vehicle, officers found a fire extinguisher with a broken nozzle, which accounted for its failure to work, supporting Johann's claims. However, it was still unclear why the fire started inside the vehicle. Although the accident was severe enough to ignite a fire, the fuel tank was unharmed, indicating that fuel couldn't have caused the fire, and the wiring appeared intact, making it unlikely that an electrical spark ignited it. There was a reason for what happened. Johann explained that earlier that day, he and his girlfriend had bought medical alcohol for cleaning and refueling equipment in the garage. He planned to clean the car's interior before selling it. He worked in a printing house where he regularly handled various chemicals. To avoid mistakes, he had developed a habit of checking the contents of chemical containers by opening them and smelling them. He believed that if the bottles had not been sealed properly, the liquids could have spilled during the accident and ignited. Before the crash, Johann noticed something glowing in his girlfriend's hands, which he thought might have been a lighter or a cell phone, but he wasn't sure. He believed that this glow could have ignited the spilled liquids. He considered the tragedy a result of unfortunate circumstances and insisted it was an accident. However, his girlfriend was still in intensive care, and the police felt it was unfair to attribute such serious damage solely to chance. As a result, detectives decided to investigate Johann further to see if he had any criminal history or tendencies toward violence. Suspecting there might have been some malicious intent in his actions, Johann was a 22-year-old worker at a printing house in Gonesse, France. He was known for being polite, conscientious, and always willing to help others. Friends and family regarded him as a model son and a dependable friend. At the time of the tragic events, he had been in a relationship with Emily for about 4 years. They had met when she was 16 and just starting her senior year of high school, while he was 2 years older. From the start, they had ambitious plans for their future, discussing the possibility of starting a family and having children. However, they were in no rush. Their plan was to first complete their education, secure good jobs, find a place to live, and only then consider starting a family. Their loved ones supported these goals, and despite their youth, they had a serious outlook on life. During college, they spent a lot of time together, often staying overnight at each other's homes. A few months before the accident, they got engaged, and Johann gave Emily a ring. They intended to move in together, and everything seemed to indicate that he was the perfect partner. The police decided to wait until dawn to investigate the scene more thoroughly. As the sun rose, the officers began to examine the area and question Johann's account of the accident. Although it was indeed an accident, they found no evidence of braking, suggesting that he may have crashed into the tree without slowing down. They suggested that the car had approached at a low speed and crashed into the tree on the passenger side, which likely explains why the driver did not incur serious injuries. The idea of wild boar tracks was deemed less credible. In daylight, the roadside was full of debris, and it was possible that the car's headlights had created confusion about the objects present. However, it appeared more like a staged incident. Experts who examined the car for flammable substances found that the fire did not start from underneath the vehicle. The lower area of the car near the driver's and passenger's feet did not sustain the damage expected in that situation. Johann claimed that alcohol or white spirit might have spilled, igniting the flames. Emily suffered the most severe burns on her head and back, suggesting that the fire started from above her seat rather than from below. In contrast, her legs were nearly untouched, which contradicted Johann's statements and raised concerns for the police. Forensic analysis of Emily's clothing revealed that it was nearly saturated with alcohol, or a similar flammable liquid. This suggested that the fire did not originate from the cabin. Rather, it appeared that Emily had been doused with a flammable substance. This raised questions about how she could have been covered in medical alcohol or white spirit, while her boyfriend remained completely clean. Johan had no injuries at all, which deepened the mystery. It seems possible that an incident occurred that only affected Emily. If she had accidentally spilled a bottle of medical alcohol, Johan would likely have sustained burns or injuries from the fire. Instead, he escaped with only minor scratches from hitting a tree. Emily remained in critical condition, and the police believed that a deliberate crime was the most plausible explanation. Evidence suggested that the incident was staged. Emily had likely been intentionally doused with a medical alcohol and set on fire. The only remaining question was the motive behind it. However, these were merely assumptions that required further investigation. Emily's testimony was crucial, as she was the only witness who could answer all the police's questions. Unfortunately, she was in an induced coma, and the doctors had not provided a clear prognosis. After 5 weeks, she finally woke up, but her condition was weak, and her body was largely incapacitated, requiring a long recovery. Emily had sustained severe injuries that left her unable to move properly. Her left leg was unresponsive, and her arms had limited mobility. However, her cognitive functions were intact, allowing her to communicate fully with the detectives, who were eager to speak with her. During their first conversation, Emily spoke fondly of her boyfriend, describing their relationship as one of pure and sincere love. Johan had always been attentive and well-mannered. However, due to her time in the coma, Emily had significant gaps in her memory. She confirmed most of Johan's account of events, but she could not remember anything after he saw a shadow run onto the road. The doctors believed these memory gaps were a result of the coma and that Emily would need time to gradually recover her memories. Further discussions with the police were unproductive, and they would have to wait for her to regain more information. In the following weeks, while Emily was still hospitalized, Johan visited her several times a day. During each visit, he repeated his story, which started to sound increasingly suspicious. It seemed he was trying to manipulate her memories so she wouldn't recall what really happened. He pressured her to relay his version of events to the authorities, claiming it was essential to secure insurance payouts for the car. However, as Emily spent more time in the hospital, her memory began to improve. She started to notice inconsistencies in her boyfriend's account, especially rejecting the idea that an animal had been on the road. Emily mentioned that she had initially repeated Johan's story because he had convinced her it was true. However, she could not remember any wild boars on the road. Instead, she distinctly recalled the tree they crashed into before the fire started. At this time, her memory was still not fully restored. The detectives decided to interview Johan again to investigate his potential lies about the animals. He continued to stand by his original story, while Emily grew increasingly uneasy with his presence. She lost all trust in him and began to side with the police regarding his possible involvement in the accident. In June 2008, Johan chose to end his engagement with his fiancée, who was still in the hospital and unable to care for herself. In late June 2008, Emily had regained her memory and was able to provide the authorities with a new account of that tragic evening. In her statement, she portrayed Johan, whom she had once loved, as a cruel tyrant and manipulator. Emily revealed that throughout their relationship, she had endured both emotional and physical abuse from him. Johan had attempted to isolate her from her friends and family, controlling every aspect of her life. She felt trapped and was afraid to leave him, fearing he would retaliate. It was a vicious cycle that needed to be broken. Just before that evening, she and Johan were driving together when another argument broke out. The girl tried to express her feelings, which only fueled her boyfriend's anger. In that moment, she revealed that she wanted to end their relationship. Johan, filled with rage, began to speed up the car, The speedometer climbed past 130 kilometers per hour, and Emily became frightened, begging him to slow down. She remembered this moment with terror, realizing she was genuinely worried for her safety. Although Emily eventually calmed Johann down and he reduced his speed, she was left with a lingering fear that if she attempted to break up with him, he might react violently. Emily felt that their once beautiful love story had turned into a nightmare of manipulation. Unsure of what to do for a long time, she eventually met another young man. They had secret meetings, and she began to gather her thoughts to prepare for a calm breakup with Johann. Emily recalled that on the evening of the tragedy, she needed to attend a reunion with her high school friends in Goussainville. Although she wanted to go to the party alone, Johann insisted on accompanying her. As they drove toward the city, Johann missed the first exit from the highway and then the second. Emily realized he wasn't taking her to the friends' meeting. He might have suspected her of meeting someone else. Instead, he was heading to his hometown. Emily didn't want to go with him and began to protest. This was the same road where Johann had scared her by speeding just before these events. Now, he was doing it again. Emily saw the tree he was heading toward at high speed, and he didn't even try to brake. She understood that a collision was unavoidable, and it indeed occurred. Fortunately, both of them survived the car accident. Emily attempted to escape from him but struggled to open the passenger door. When she finally managed to get it open, she was unexpectedly engulfed in flames. Confused and in excruciating pain, she tried to extinguish the fire but collapsed to the ground. Suddenly, she felt pressure on her face. Emily told the detective that she saw Johann trying to strangle her with his leather jacket, which contradicted his claim that he was attempting to put out the fire. This led to the suggestion that Johann was trying to kill his fiancée. Ultimately, Emily lost consciousness and woke up in a hospital bed several weeks later. After recalling these events, she filed a report for attempted murder. Although Emily's family portrayed Johann positively, her concerns about him began to surface. Detectives interviewed Eloise, a co-worker of Emily's at the cash register. Eloise recalled that Johann exhibited erratic behavior. He called Emily daily, sometimes multiple times an hour, and frequently stalked her. He would become very upset if she didn't answer right away. Since Emily was busy at work, she couldn't always talk on the phone, but Johann disregarded this. His jealousy was intense. If Emily missed his calls, he would often show up at the supermarket and cause a scene, suspecting her of infidelity. Eloise confirmed that Emily had expressed her unhappiness about Johann's behavior several months before the car accident, leading her to consider breaking up with him. To gather more evidence, the police checked Johann's mobile phone and found that it had been at the Goussainville station one day before the incident. Emily traveled to this station daily for classes at a nearby school, close to where her new boyfriend lived. They often met during her commutes to and from college. It was revealed that Johann had witnessed another encounter between Emily and her new boyfriend, during which she had kissed him. This incident likely fueled Johann's jealousy and manipulation, which may have contributed to his decision to confront Emily. At this time, investigators found a motive that prompted Johann to take action. The key questions were how the fire started. It seems Johann did not plan to kill himself along with Emily. Instead, he intended to make it look like an accident, with the fire aimed at harming her. When he realized that Emily had not suffered serious injuries from the crash and that her burns were not life-threatening, he opted to strangle her with his leather jacket. Emily lost consciousness, and Johann mistakenly believed he had succeeded, so he called emergency services. However, he did not anticipate that Emily would survive and regain consciousness. Despite this, the investigators still lacked sufficient evidence to file charges, leading the police to conduct a more thorough investigation. During this time, the burned car was at the junkyard, where an expert in flammable materials and fire safety was summoned. After a brief search, they found a plastic bottle with alcohol residue under the driver's seat. The expert indicated that this was evidence of the fuel that Johann used to set Emily on fire. At the time, Emily was desperately trying to escape through the door and did not notice what Johann was doing. He took advantage of her distraction and confusion. After pouring the alcohol on Emily's dress, he casually placed the bottle by his feet near the driver's seat. Authorities found this sequence of events much more believable than Johann's account. They now had the murder weapon, a regular plastic bottle containing a highly flammable substance. On January 7, 2009, Johann was arrested and taken into custody. Despite the detectives' repeated efforts to get him to confess, he stuck to his story. He asserted that he had no mental health issues or addictions, nor did he have tendencies toward end his life or cruelty. Claims that were corroborated by several witnesses who knew him and Emily. Johann acknowledged that he felt jealous but denied the accusations that he had tormented Emily for months. He believed she was trying to take revenge for their breakup. Johann confirmed that he had been at the Goussainville station, but stated that he did not see Emily meeting or kissing other guys. He was there not to stalk her but to give her a ride to school when he could. Johann maintained that if he had seen her kissing someone else, he would have confronted her immediately, making a breakup unavoidable. He remained loyal to Emily until the very end, and was committed to the dream of having a complete family with her. The reason Johann passed the turn several times and ended up on a remote stretch of road away from Goussainville was a common habit. He liked to take detours when going into town. There were also concerns about an alcohol bottle found at his feet. Johann argued that this bottle did not indicate he had used substances for arson. He suggested that it could have rolled around the cabin during the incident and that its placement under the seat was purely coincidental. Despite the plausibility of his words, the detectives were frustrated by these coincidences, especially since they nearly resulted in Emily's death. In the end, Johann was incarcerated. It appeared that the investigation was wrapping up and the focus was now on determining his punishment and persuading the jury of the charges against him. However, in June 2009, a previously overlooked detail came to light that raised doubts about the prosecution's case. Johann's attorney demonstrated that the alcohol in the bottle found under the driver's seat did not match the size of the chemicals Johann had purchased on the day of the accident. From the start, the defense attorney believed the bottle was not a legitimate murder weapon and argued that the gendarmes had made a significant error. They overlooked the fact that the bottle could not have survived the fire that nearly took Emily's life. Since it originally held a flammable substance, it should have burned or melted, yet miraculously, it remained almost intact. The lawyer argued that the bottle only appeared in the car after it was taken to the dump, implying that someone had placed it there. The defense lodged a complaint in court, accusing the police of fabricating evidence against Johann. In response, the prosecution explained the bottle's condition by noting that the area around the feet of the driver and passenger sustained minimal damage. The judge reviewed the motion, found it valid, and subsequently released the accused from custody. Even after this victory, the lawyer continued his pursuit of justice. He took further steps to establish his client's innocence, firmly believing that the events of November 9, 2007 were purely accidental. To support his case, an independent accident expert was to reconstruct the incident. It was essential to clarify how the fire began and why only Emily was affected. According to the expert, the bottle of technical alcohol was indeed in the rear seat, as Johann had stated, and the victim must have had the container propelled forward due to the impact speed with the dashboard. The bottle likely ricocheted, and if the cap was not securely fastened, the alcohol would have splattered on the driver or passenger. Emily was simply unfortunate. The bottle moved toward her, dousing her in alcohol, and in her confusion, she did not realize what had happened before catching fire. The reconstructed path of the bottle matched exactly with the most severely burned areas on the girl's body, particularly her back and the back of her head, aligning with the expert's findings. Additionally, that part of the road was poorly lit, which meant that in the dark, the driver might have confused any random object on the roadside for an animal due to the headlights. There were several large objects scattered around, making the theory of an accident seem plausible. Moreover, since the passenger was positioned at a different angle, she might not have noticed the fleeting shadow that Johann thought was a wild boar. The only element that didn't fit this scenario was the source of the fire that ignited the alcohol. However, the independent expert had a reasonable explanation for this. He suggested that the spark could have been caused by a combination of factors. For example, static electricity might have built up on one of Emily's belongings, like her mobile phone, and discharged when she opened the vehicle door. By mid-January 2017, 10 years had passed, and the legal disputes were still ongoing. The prosecution's evidence was not strong enough to prove that Johann's actions were intentional. Meanwhile, the explanations involving multiple coincidences also lacked credibility, leaving the case unresolved. A standoff developed between the prosecution and the defense. June 2019, Emily testified in court about how Johann had tried to kill her, and she miraculously survived. Now she could finally share the whole truth. 12 years after the tragedy, the jurors sentenced Johann to 20 years in prison, concluding that Emily was a victim of his deliberate attempt to murder her. Johann continues to claim his innocence, and the disputes persist. What really happened? Was it an accident or an attempted crime? Regardless, all the characters in this tragedy continue to live. Emily underwent several skin grafts and was able to recover from her injuries. She completed her education and found a good job. The scars from the burns she suffered in the car accident will remain with her forever, as will her belief that Johann intended to take her life. On the dazzling New Year's Eve, when the entire city was counting down to welcome the new year, Noelle Paquette, a 27-year-old girl, stepped out of the party and walked home. No one knew those were her last steps. Noelle was a dedicated teacher, devoted to her family and community. But in minutes, she vanished. Her family frantically searched, while the police believed she simply needed time to calm down. However, strange things began to happen. A white car, two strangers, and a turn into the darkness. Only one witness saw Noelle get into the car before everything went silent. Everyone was shocked to learn that her disappearance led to one of the most heinous crimes in Canadian history, committed by a couple with a cruel fetish far beyond human imagination. When all the clues came together, the shocking truth was revealed. Noelle was not just lost. She was being hunted. Noelle Paquette was born on December 11, 1985. She was an active and friendly girl who easily connected with everyone, regardless of their age or social status. She was the second of 4 siblings in a close-knit family. Noelle attended high school in Sarnia, where she studied diligently and always knew what she wanted in life. Education and career were her top priorities. Although she wanted to start a family, she wanted to fulfill her dreams and become independent first. After graduating with excellent grades, she moved to Ottawa to pursue a bachelor's degree. Eventually, she found her true passion for teaching while in South Korea and enrolled in university to earn her teaching diploma. Everyone says that Noelle dearly loves her friends, and vice versa. However, her trustfulness sometimes led to difficulties. After obtaining her diploma, she began teaching at an elementary school and became a member of the student council within a few years. Despite her professional success, her personal life was challenging. Though she had romantic relationships and had a child, her first relationship ended, leaving her as a single mother. This change affected her daily life. Full-time work became difficult, so during her maternity leave, she became a teacher at a kindergarten near her home. When her child grew older, she was able to return to a normal life. Besides work, she also volunteered at an organization that helps people with disabilities and participated in a charity that supports children with serious illnesses. Despite her busy schedule, she still made time for soccer, the gym, and spending time with family and friends. By the end of 2012, Noelle was 27 years old. She dreamed of having a large family, continuing her career, and starting a relationship with a new boyfriend. On December 31st, she attended a party with friends. Unfortunately, the night started off poorly, as tensions arose between her and her boyfriend. After midnight, a conflict escalated, prompting Noelle to leave the party early. She is having difficulty finding a car to go home. At around 2 a.m., she left the party and said that she would walk home. Even though the distance takes about 20 minutes by car, her friends tried to persuade her to stay, but she didn't want to stay with her boyfriend and needed time to calm down. Unable to get a taxi, she decided to walk home. Despite their warnings, by 2:30 a.m., her boyfriend was worried. He had been trying to reach her since she left, initially thinking she would soon return, as she had done in the past during disagreements. When she didn't answer and her calls went to voicemail, he grew anxious and decided to check the route she might have taken, but found no sign of her. He then assumed she had likely gotten a ride with someone else and stopped searching, believing she just needed time alone. The next morning, Noelle's parents discovered that their daughter was missing. She had promised to come home after the party to spend time with her family and children the next day, but that didn't happen. They tried calling her cell phone multiple times, but there was no response. Growing worried, they first contacted Noelle's boyfriend, thinking she might have stayed over with him. He told them that she had left the party following a small argument and hadn't reached out to him since. Everyone, especially Noelle's mother, was very worried upon learning of the situation. On January 13, 2013, she called the police to report her daughter missing. Unfortunately, the officers were hesitant to take the case seriously, assuming Noelle had simply overindulged on New Year's Eve and would return home soon. Instead of searching for her, they went about their daily routines. While her family and friends decided to organize their own search, they contacted everyone who had attended the party, but no one had seen Noelle since she left. Her phone still went unanswered. After pressure from her family, the police finally began searching for Noelle. The investigation deepened, and the situation became increasingly serious as there were no signs of her being active, no access to social media, and no use of credit cards. Significantly, she hadn't contacted her family or her child, which was completely out of character for her. To shape their investigation, detectives started interviewing others who were at the party, particularly Noelle's boyfriend. Given their argument that night, he stated that he had left to look for Noelle but did not return. Others at the party corroborated this. He asserted that after unsuccessful searching, he simply returned home, but no one could confirm his story, making his alibi questionable. While he cooperated with law enforcement, describing his relationship with Noelle as serious and generally stable, he admitted that their disagreements could escalate. The police found no evidence against him and no prior criminal record, making him appear innocent. Everyone depicted him as calm and composed, incapable of violence. Even those at the party saw their disagreement as minor, with no physical confrontation occurring. As detectives pursued new leads, Noelle's family continued their own investigation. They made flyers with her picture and reached out to local residents. The mother and her youngest daughter showed Noelle's photo to people they encountered on the street. One man recognized her. He had been returning from a bar that night and noticed Noelle walking alone along a deserted road. He described her as being far behind him, but catching his eye, he saw a car pull up next to her, and after a brief exchange, she got in. What followed raised suspicions. Another man, previously unnoted, ran toward the white car. Instead of driving away, the car backed up and the stranger jumped into the back seat. The car then sped off quickly, squealing its tires. Initially, the witness didn't think much of it, but later he regretted not reporting it to the police. When Noel's mother relayed this account at the police station, detectives became interested and decided to interview the witness personally. His account seemed plausible, especially after they reviewed CCTV footage from the area. Noel was seen walking down the street, but then disappeared from the camera's view. The footage captured a white Pontiac, which a witness identified as the vehicle that had picked up both Noel and a strange man. Unfortunately, the car soon left the city and moved toward the interurban highway, causing it to go out of sight. However, this information revealed a troubling coincidence. Around 4 a.m. on New Year's Eve, a highway patrol officer noticed the same white Pontiac about 30 kilometers from Sarnia. The car was stopped on the side of the road with its hazard lights on, smoke rising from the hood, and both the driver and passenger attempting to extinguish a fire. A police officer, thinking they needed help, approached. A 19-year-old man was outside looking at the engine, while a 31-year-old woman was inside. The headlights illuminated their hands, faces, and clothes, which were covered in odd stains that looked like blood. They appeared to have been in some kind of accident and needed assistance. The woman got out and admitted to the police officer that her hands were covered in blood, but didn't specify the cause. The car belonged to Tanya Bogdanovich, and the young man with her introduced himself as Michael McGregor. Tanya explained that she and Michael had gone into the woods for privacy. They enjoyed extreme forms of intimacy, including tying each other up and using knives. After examining them, the police observed that they had several stab wounds, scratches, and abrasions, but none appeared to be life-threatening. Tanya insisted that their injuries were caused by the use of sharp objects during intimacy, claiming they accidentally hurt each other. Although this explained the blood, it did not sound very convincing. Michael supported her story, but neither could satisfactorily explain why they chose to engage in such intimate activities in a secluded forest at night. Although their car was inoperable, they insisted they didn't need help. However, the officers prioritized their own safety and called for emergency assistance. Tanya and Michael were taken to a medical center, leaving their car behind for later towing. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics noticed their strange behavior. In spite of the circumstances, they behaved casually, laughing, hugging, and kissing as though nothing was wrong. While paramedics treated their wounds, police officers looked into their backgrounds. Michael is a pizza delivery man, while Tanya is a nurse with 3 children, working at a nursing home. Finding nothing unusual, the police left the clinic, leaving them alone. However, considering an eyewitness account of Noel's abduction by a strange couple, the situation seemed increasingly suspicious. Patrol officers reported that Tanya and Michael looked quite frightening, similar to characters in a horror movie, even though they always appeared cheerful and refused any help. This raised red flags about their true intentions. Detectives sought to investigate further and discovered that Michael and Tanya were not married, but merely dating. It turned out that they had met 7 months earlier on a community website, where they quickly connected and started sharing their unique fantasies. Initially, they communicated through messages and later included other community members. Soon after meeting in person, their role-playing became more explicit and disturbing, but they were still not satisfied. Ultimately, they decided to fulfill their darkest fantasies. On January 2, while the investigation was ongoing, a new witness contacted law enforcement to inform them of a woman's body he had discovered. The body was located in a remote wooded area outside of Sarnia, approximately 30 kilometers away. When the police arrived, they quickly recognized that the woman had been violently and brutally murdered. The victim had been mutilated and left in the snow, showing clear signs of a struggle. Her hands, face, and upper body had wounds consistent with self-defense, and there were numerous marks indicating torture. Official identification confirmed that the victim was 27-year-old Noelle Paquette. Most of her injuries seemed to have been caused by a bladed weapon, likely a small knife. A forensic expert identified marks from 2 different knives, suggesting the involvement of 2 assailants. In addition, Noelle was also subjected to abuse. The absence of snow during the New Year's holiday made it easier to gather evidence. Many footprints were found near her body and traced back to a white Pontiac vehicle. A couple, Tanya and Michael, were discovered in that same car with their hazard lights on, close to the forest where the body was found. Police suspected them of being involved in the murder, so they collected their clothes and personal items for forensic analysis. Although Tanya and Michael were initially released, the police later issued arrest warrants just 2 days after Noelle's body was found. Tanya, a mother of 3, was arrested in a hospital parking lot while accompanying Michael, who was there to get stitches for injuries he sustained during the attack. He allegedly cut himself. Upon his release, he was also taken into custody. With the suspects now apprehended, detectives began piecing together the events of that New Year's Eve, a task that proved more challenging than anticipated. They utilized electronic evidence, including texts, emails, social media posts, and private messages exchanged between Tanya and Michael, to help solve the case. During the interrogations, Tanya and Michael consistently denied any involvement in the murder of Noelle. However, as they spoke, detectives uncovered numerous inconsistencies in their statements. They initially described their relationship in vague terms, referring to themselves as playmates or best friends. Despite a 12-year age gap and differing lifestyles, sometimes they compared themselves to wild animals, revealing glimpses of their unusual tendencies. Their exchanges quickly shifted from a flirtatious relationship to discussions of crime and cruel games. Both Tanya and Michael shared morbid fantasies about intimacy in the woods, abuse, dominance, and murder. Their communications revealed that their first intimate encounter occurred in June 2012 at the same forest where Noelle was killed. In their role-playing, it was alleged that Michael abused Tanya, which she later described as empowering. Michael responded by claiming that she had awakened his sadistic side, enjoying the humiliation and fear he inflicted upon her. In her view, these encounters were preparation for something more serious. Their encounters for intimate activities became more frequent, including public meetings. They documented these events in a blog under pseudonyms, taking names from cartoon characters. Their blog posts detailed scenes of bondage, role-playing, and taboo interactions, such as leading each other around malls on leashes and in handcuffs. Over time, their violent fantasies grew more extreme, indicating an insatiable desire. By September 2012, they began discussing the need for a third person to join their games, quickly realizing that they wanted a real victim to torture, abuse, and murder. After finalizing her plan, Tanya began to act. She went to a hardware store and bought 2 knives, a fact confirmed during the investigation. These knives later became the murder weapons. Shortly after buying the knives, Tanya gifted Michael a digital photo frame filled with images of young girls, all sharing a common trait: they were young and innocent, similar to the type her boyfriend preferred. Included in these images was a girl Tanya knew personally. They then began searching for a victim. But Noelle wasn't on their list. They spent nearly 3 months preparing for their crime, and by New Year's Eve, they were ready to commit acts of abuse and murder. However, the girl Michael had chosen wasn't there. Her plan changed at the last minute, and she left town for the holidays. This saved her life, but made Noelle a target. Tanya and Michael refused to abandon their violent intentions. The day before the planned murder, Tanya informed Michael that they would need to select a victim at random. This forced them to change their plan. They decided to find any young woman on the street and set up an elaborate trap. Tanya would drive with Michael, both observing and searching for a suitable victim. When they spotted a target, Michael would get out of the car and watch her from a distance. Tanya would approach the woman herself and lure her into the car. Then she would pick up Michael. While in the back seat, Michael would use a knife to threaten the victim. Their plan unfolded flawlessly. A background check revealed they didn't know Noelle. Unfortunately, she was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. While Noelle enjoyed a party with friends and her boyfriend, Tanya, who worked at a nursing home, spent her days and evenings texting Michael, assuring him that their plan would succeed on New Year's Eve. Additionally, finding taxis or transportation on New Year's Eve was a challenge, as many would be seeking rides. Tanya finished her shift at 11:00 p.m. and met Michael on the city embankment to celebrate New Year's. They lit some fireworks, discussed their plan, and began their hunt. True to their expectations, Tanya took the wheel, believing that a woman driving would appear more trustworthy than a stranger trying to help. This tactic proved effective when Tanya approached Noelle, who gratefully accepted the offer of a ride home. Once Noelle was inside, Tanya reversed the car, and Michael entered the backseat to execute their plan. Michael quickly brandished a knife, putting it against Noelle's throat and threatening her life. As Noelle complied without resistance, they drove her on quiet, dark roads, 30 kilometers outside the city, to a remote forest. They intended to drive further, but their white car unexpectedly broke down near the woods. Unbothered by the situation, Tanya and Michael forced Noelle out of the car, dragged her into the woods, and subjected her to abuse, torture, and, ultimately, murder. An autopsy revealed she suffered countless stab wounds, damaging her heart, lungs, liver, and other critical organs. However, the fatal injury was a deep cut to her throat. Her body was left in the woods, stripped of her clothes and personal belongings. Tanya and Michael tried to escape but were unsuccessful because their car broke down. Fortunately, they attracted the attention of patrol officers. Otherwise, finding them would have been very difficult. The investigation lasted nearly 3 years, aiming to reconstruct the sequence of events. During this time, a great deal of evidence was gathered against Tanya and Michael, including digital data and expert analysis results from the white Pontiac. By the end of 2015, all the details surrounding Noelle's horrific death had been clarified, and a preliminary hearing was scheduled for December. Tanya and Michael had initially denied their involvement in the crime. However, surprisingly, just before the trial began, they pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, choosing to forego a trial. This decision was likely influenced by the overwhelming evidence against them, as a confession might have been their only chance to lessen the severity of their sentences. Noelle's relatives believe that Tanya and Michael avoided revealing gruesome details of the murder to avoid public outrage, hoping to receive a lighter sentence. In 2016, both Tanya Bogdanovich and Michael McGregor were sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, the maximum penalty under Canadian law. The judge made it clear that they had committed one of the most brutal crimes in Canadian history. In addition to life imprisonment, Tanya and Michael were placed in a DNA database, added to the National Abuser List, and banned from owning firearms for life. They were also forbidden from contacting Noelle's family and friends. Shortly after, Tanya, 34, and Michael, 22, expressed apologies to Noelle's parents, but many found their apologies insincere. Although Canadian law didn't allow for a harsher sentence, some still felt the sentences were too lenient. Relatives of Noelle expressed their concerns, with her mother revealing that she had suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder and depression following her daughter's death. She was haunted by nightmares and unable to return to work even 3 years later. Hello friends. Welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Mary Griffiths. In 2009, Mary Griffiths was a 38-year-old woman and the mother of 3 daughters, aged 9, 10, and 13. All 3 children were born during her marriage. However, her relationship with her husband did not last long. By 2007, they had divorced, but they remained on good terms. Mary was granted primary custody of the children while her ex-husband took them on weekends. There were no disputes regarding this arrangement. Mary focused on moving forward and providing for her daughters. She worked hard to ensure they had everything they needed. To save time on commuting and spend more time with her children, she found a job as a fitness instructor at a gym near her rented home. Over time, Mary was able to purchase a house in the small town of Berry Street, Edmonds, UK. Her life seemed to be improving more and more. Mary decided to try building a relationship again. With her good looks, attractiveness, and great physical shape, she felt confident that finding a partner wouldn't be a problem. Thanks to her outgoing personality and striking appearance, she quickly caught the attention of John McFarlane. They met during a time when both were searching for new jobs. As they got to know each other, they discovered a shared passion for martial arts, sports, and similar perspectives on life. Over time, Mary and John began taking the same fitness classes. They both became instructors at the same fitness center. Despite some clear differences between them, they connected easily. They began spending more time together, commuting to work, having lunch, and hanging out after their shifts. John even covered for Mary at work when she couldn't make it. However, for Mary, the relationship was just a friendship. Mary is outgoing, so she easily connects with people, including John. She considers him a friend and firmly believes their relationship is purely platonic. When speaking with her family and friends, she often emphasizes that there is absolutely no possibility of a romantic relationship between her and John, partly because he is married. Unfortunately, John saw things differently. He interpreted Mary's friendliness and conversations with him as a sign that they could become a couple. Deeply infatuated with her, he began to romanticize their interactions. Mary's behavior only reinforced his feelings. For years after they became friends, Mary helped organize John's 40th birthday party. John misinterpreted this gesture as something deeply personal, an indication that she had romantic feelings for him, which only reinforced his certainty about his feelings for her. John was naturally introverted and had little experience with women who offered him the kind of warmth and care that Mary did. His marriage had grown cold over time, so Mary's attitude felt especially significant to him. After the birthday party, he started dreaming of a life with her by his side. These fantasies quickly turned into an obsession, despite him still being married. He began discussing with his friends the possibility of divorcing his wife to pursue Mary. Mary, however, was unaware of his feelings. A few months later, she started dating someone else, which shocked and disappointed him. Mary was happy in her new relationship and openly shared details with him, not realizing the emotional pain it caused. For him, the situation became deeply traumatic. Resentment and anger built up over time, eventually becoming impossible for him to contain. Mary shared a post about her boyfriend on social media, and that was when the problem started. John responded to the post by leaving angry messages. He insulted Mary and made baseless accusations, including infidelity and a reckless lifestyle, none of which were true. John's behavior grew increasingly obsessive, and he started attempting to intimidate Mary through frequent and unsettling phone calls. Mary started to notice that John would appear at places she visited, even though he had no reason to know her whereabouts. Their interactions dwindled, and the distance between them grew, but John was clearly unhappy about this. The tension escalated further as he bombarded her with daily phone calls. His erratic behavior began to strain her relationship with her new boyfriend. Mary's friends and family observed that John acted as though they had been in a romantic relationship and believed she had betrayed him. He seemed consumed by these imagined scenarios, leading to ongoing dissatisfaction and aggression. Although John's actions were not illegal, Mary had made it clear on multiple occasions that she only considered him a friend and never intended for their relationship to be more than platonic. Unfortunately, John's perception of the situation did not align with reality. Mary grew increasingly anxious due to John's troubling behavior. Fearing his aggression, she avoided public places in the city, worried she might encounter him. Her fears escalated when an intruder entered her home late at night and slashed all 4 tires on her car. She suspected that John was responsible. She was convinced he wanted to sabotage her relationship with her new boyfriend, leaving her isolated. His interference was successful when he spread false information about her, ultimately causing her and her boyfriend to break up. Mary was devastated by the breakup, while John felt triumphant. Misinterpreting her distress, he believed she was now available and ready to be with him. He saw her resistance as playful teasing, deluding himself with fantasies about their connection. Feeling haunted, John took a drastic step. After learning that Mary had broken up with her boyfriend, he immediately went to court to file for divorce from his wife. Although they had been married for over 20 years, John was determined to leave and start a new life with another woman. This became particularly troubling when Mary found out. She couldn't understand where he was getting his ideas or what was influencing his decisions. The entire situation deeply unsettled her. Seeking advice, she often spoke with her relatives, who encouraged her to contact the police. Mary had enough evidence to take action against him, but her doing so only escalated the situation. John began bombarding Mary with calls and messages. In each message, he expressed his intense emotions, insisting they could be incredibly happy together if she agreed. He claimed Mary had feelings for him that she was suppressing, urging her to be honest and embrace them so they could pursue a life together. However, Mary had no such intentions. In one conversation, she firmly stated that they were just friends and that she had no plans to take their relationship beyond that. This upset John, as his perspective on friendship was different from Mary's. Yet, he couldn't resist trying to become more involved in her life. Although she rejected all his romantic advances, she still maintained their friendship. It seemed she pitied him, and perhaps even feared that ending their connection would lead to serious problems. Mary hoped to continue the relationship peacefully. He, however, took every opportunity to be near her, visiting her home frequently, and she always let him in. During these visits, he repeatedly made advances, such as attempting to kiss her when they sat together on the couch. Mary consistently rejected him, but he persisted. Mary considered ending the meetings, but John then used his cleverness to get closer to her daughters. He bonded with them, spending quality time together, and they began asking when he would visit again. After John's divorce, he spent almost all his free time with Mary and her children, as though he were waiting for them to invite him to live with them. Meanwhile, Mary's relationship with her ex-boyfriend remained unresolved. Both she and her ex had doubts and considered rekindling their relationship. However, those doubts were primarily rooted in John's behavior, making them uncertain about the possibility of being together again. Whenever John sees Mary and her ex-boyfriend together, he gets angry and often has aggressive outbursts. On one occasion, he lost control entirely. Still, she tried to remain patient, while John blamed her for the breakup of his relationship. Eventually, she asked her ex-boyfriend to visit her home more frequently to help her and her children feel safer during those moments. When John found out, he reacted badly. He began posting misleading content on social media, claiming he was in a relationship with Mary. Tired of the situation, she decided to put an end to it. She left a comment under the post, clearly stating that there was no relationship between them. In this situation, the most reasonable thing for John to do is leave Mary alone and focus on his life, allowing her to mend her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. However, John went to Mary's house again instead. By exploiting her sympathy, he convinced her to let him in. Mary, having a kind heart and considering him a friend, allowed him to stay the night, offering him the couch. It was a stormy evening, and she didn't have it in her to leave him out in the bad weather. He appealed to her compassion, reminding her of his struggles after being kicked out by his wife. The arrangement was that he would sleep on the couch, and the next morning, after the children left for school, they would discuss and clarify the situation. For John, it was all just a game. That same night, he attempted to seduce Mary. Mary, however, believed that he stood in her doorway at night, watching her as she slept. At the time, she was in bed with her youngest daughter, who was afraid to sleep alone in her room. She woke up feeling unnerved by his unsettling gaze. She began yelling at him to go away, which woke the children. The incident led to another heated outburst, during which John accused his friend of giving false hope only to crush it for his own amusement. Afterwards, John left, but things took an even darker turn. He started posting alarming content on his social media accounts, talking about death and hinting at ending his life. He also shared these thoughts with many of his friends. At one point, he even shared a disturbing photo of himself standing next to a noose in a barn, as if he were preparing to follow through on his threats. His actions escalated further when he attempted to swallow sleeping pills on 2 separate occasions in a short time span, both of which required medical intervention. On May 3, 2009, John's behavior had become so troubling that Mary insisted he see a psychiatrist. His friends, including his ex-wife, agreed with her. However, the psychiatrist could not diagnose John with any mental disorders and concluded that he was not a danger to himself or others. This misjudgment would prove to be the first in a series of tragic mistakes with devastating consequences. It seemed that John was aware of the issues he was facing and became distressed when the doctors decided not to treat him or admit him to a psychiatric clinic. This news deeply frightened Mary. She felt threatened, worried for the girls around her, and helpless in the face of this danger. On May 5, 2009, Mary's worst fears began to come true. That day, she called emergency services at 999. She told the operator that her friend, John, was acting erratically and appeared to have gone crazy. His alarming behavior left her anxious and unsure of how to handle the situation. Mary explained his history of stalking, his inappropriate actions, and his references to ending his life. Despite these concerns, the operator assessed the situation as non-urgent, indicating a response time of 1 to 4 hours, as all officers were occupied. Mary was informed that a police officer would only be able to visit her the following morning. The operator advised her to call again if the situation escalated, promising a faster response in that case. However, Mary had valid reasons for her initial call. On that day, John attacked her for the first time, exploiting his knowledge of her vulnerabilities. Injured in the attack, she sought treatment for her leg at the hospital. But upon returning home, she found John waiting for her. He was relentless, always lingering near her, pretending to support her, and trying to convince her that she could not live without him. The situation became so dire that when Mary was putting her daughters to bed, the girls were deeply afraid that John might return and harm their mother, possibly taking her away forever. John, finally driven away, was furious. He sent Mary a threatening message, feeling rejected and vowing revenge. Those who knew him were deeply concerned about his behavior and even alerted the police. For instance, Mary's friend called emergency services at around 6:30 p.m. that same day, expressing worry about John's mental state due to his volatile actions. Despite clear evidence of John's dangerous behavior, the authorities failed to take Mary's friend's warning seriously or consider the urgency of her earlier call. Much later, close to midnight, John himself made another call to the police to report a robbery. This ensured that the officers would respond to his call, giving him the opportunity to go to Mary's house. Before leaving, he sent a message to his wife, expressing that he still loved her but blaming her for their problems and the breakup with Mary. He ended the message with an ominous and ambiguous note, suggesting he planned to resolve matters once and for all. John armed himself with an axe and a specialized weapon used for slaughtering cattle, then headed toward Mary's house. At the time, Mary was resting with her children, completely unaware of the impending danger. Around midnight, John arrived at her house, standing near the back door. He used the axe to break in, then threw it in the kitchen. He proceeded to locate the fuse box, which he knew from previous visits, and cut off the electricity to the entire house. With the power out, he climbed the stairs to the second floor. Mary was asleep in her room with her 10-year-old daughter but woke up when she heard someone entering. Confused, she tried to turn on the light and realized it wasn't working. In a moment of terror, she recognized who the intruder must be. Before she could act, John attacked her. He began hitting her and dragged her out of the bed onto the floor, where he pinned her down and started choking her. The commotion woke up all the children in the house. They tried to resist John, but he was much stronger than they were. He injured 2 children and attacked Mary, aiming for her chest. She managed to dodge, but the bullet hit her shoulder, leaving her wounded. This escalated into a desperate fight for survival. Despite her injury, she fought back with all her strength. Realizing she couldn't overpower him, she decided to reach the street, hoping to draw him away from the children and call for help. Mary's 2 daughters were injured and unable to resist any longer, and Mary tried her best to protect them. John attempted to strangle her but failed. Injured and desperate, she struggled to make her way to the front door. She managed to run down the stairs and out onto the street, screaming for help. Her cries caught the attention of the neighbors, who began coming outside to see what was going on. Several witnesses saw John holding a weapon, which he pointed at Mary's chest as she stood terrified. In front of everyone, including children, he attacked twice. Among the neighbors was an off-duty policeman who had been at home resting. The officer approached John, trying to calm him down and reason with him. Without hesitation, he aimed the weapon at the officer, threatening to attack. Unarmed, the policeman raised his hands and retreated, a move that likely saved his life. Afterward, John struck Mary's youngest daughter and fled the scene. Among the neighbors were doctors who attempted to assist Mary while waiting for an ambulance, but tragically, their efforts were in vain. She passed away. 2 of her daughters required hospital treatment, though their injuries were not severe, at least physically. Thankfully, the situation did not escalate to the worst-case scenario. Later, it was revealed that John's original plan was not to harm Mary but to target her children. However, his plan didn't go as intended. He had also planned to take his own life in Mary's home to ensure she lived with the resulting trauma. He shared this sinister plan with a friend through a messaging app, explaining that this was his idea of revenge for Mary breaking his heart. Sadly, the friend dismissed these remarks and did not intervene, merely advising John to return to his wife and calm down. After attacking Mary, John immediately wrote to the same friend and confessed what he had done. He was later found bleeding near the house where he had been living for the past few weeks. Upon returning to the house, he attempted to end his life by cutting his wrist but was rescued in time. After regaining consciousness, he claimed to experience memory lapses. He stated that he recalled multiple attempts to end his life, including one just before his arrest. John told the police about his relationship with Mary, describing how she had rejected and betrayed him. Vaguely, he remembered fragments of their fight and the attack, but most of his memories were missing. While it appeared that he may have been in a state of emotional distress, the detectives believed he was feigning mental health issues to avoid responsibility for his actions. Their suspicions were reinforced by evidence that John had carefully planned the crime. He had shared the plan with a friend, said goodbye to his ex-wife, and even contacted the authorities beforehand to delay their arrival. John took weapons from the farm where he worked and spent additional time at the fitness center prior to committing the crime. This further demonstrates that his actions were intentional, in contrast to those of individuals suffering from severe mental illnesses. Predictably, the defense attorney argued that John suffered from a mental disorder and had endured a difficult childhood. Following this argument, John was sent for a psychiatric evaluation, which confirmed that he had a severe form of depressive disorder. Despite receiving this diagnosis, he did not admit guilt, claiming that he could not remember anything. Initially, the prosecution aimed to prove premeditated murder in court, but this course of action was eventually deemed unnecessary. After assessing all relevant factors, John's lawyer advised him to accept responsibility. John changed his testimony and pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter, although he maintained that much of what had occurred was beyond his memory. For Mary's family, this confession brought some degree of relief. Nevertheless, they were compelled to endure the hearing, during which they agonizingly learned the harrowing details of Mary's final moments. John McFarlane received a sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 20 years. Typically, parole for such crimes is not considered until after 30 years. However, the court reduced the minimum term to 20 years, citing confirmed mental health issues as a mitigating factor. Mary's family was outraged that the court had considered John's mental health as justification for a reduced sentence. They strongly believed that John deserved a far harsher punishment, arguing that he not only killed Mary but also posed a serious threat to others, including her children. In their view, John should remain isolated from society permanently. The family testified to John's obsessive and dangerous behavior, presenting evidence that he had initially planned to harm the children. Ultimately, it appeared that Mary's desperate struggle with John had diverted his attention away from the children, but at the cost of her own life. Due to the persistent efforts of Mary's family, the case was reviewed. As a result, John's minimum sentence of 20 years was increased to the standard 30 years. Following the retrial, the senior investigator approached Mary and expressed hope that the revised decision and extended sentence would provide her greater comfort. However, the matter did not end there. Mary's children, Sophie, the youngest, turned 18, Hannah, 19, and Jessica, 22, jointly decided to pursue accountability for those they believed had contributed to John's attack. They held the police department, specifically the dispatcher, and the psychiatrist who had deemed John sane and failed to mandate psychiatric treatment, responsible for their perceived negligence. They argued that if the danger posed by John had been fully understood, Mary might still be alive. This seemed logical, as even a brief conversation with a psychiatrist, who had evaluated John after his arrest, reportedly revealed signs of mental illness. Serious psychological issues had clearly been overlooked, and it remained unclear why 2 previous hospital tests had failed to detect similar problems. It became evident that the response to calls placed by Mary and her friend, made only half an hour apart, was inadequate. The dispatcher underestimated the severity of the situation, which they believed to be the main reason the police failed to respond in time to prevent the tragedy. This failure prompted revisions to several regulations aimed at improving threat detection and enhancing police procedures. It was decided that law enforcement officers had fulfilled everything correctly within the regulations. However, Sophie, Hannah, and Jessica do not lose hope that their efforts were not in vain and that this will at least help save the lives of other victims.